A mother of two helps a beggar. Then her boss calls her to the office and accuses her of something she didn't do. Little did she know that the next few moments would change her life forever. The mop slid across the polished marble floor, leaving a trail of lemony freshness in its wake. Camilla Oliveira paused to wipe the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, careful not to let any droplets fall onto the immaculate surface she had just cleaned. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky, a stark contrast to the fluorescent brightness that surrounded her. 20 minutes until I can see my babies, she whispered to herself, the thought providing a second wind as she wrung the mop one last time. At 32, Camilla's hands were already rough and calloused, bearing the marks of countless hours scrubbing, polishing, and sanitizing. Her uniform, a simple grey dress with the company logo embroidered on the breast pocket, hung loosely on her thin frame. Once it had fit perfectly, but months of skipping meals to ensure her children ate had taken their toll. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against the floor made her straighten her posture instinctively. Gabriel Montero, the operations manager, strode past without acknowledging her presence, as if she were merely another piece of office furniture. In his hand was a report detailing quarterly profits in the millions, figures that made Camilla's weekly paycheck seemed like a cruel joke. As she finished the executive floor, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from Mrs. Pereira, their elderly neighbor who watched 7-year-old Luisa and 5-year-old Miguel while Camilla worked. Miguel's cough is worse. Gave him cough syrup. Luisa finished homework. Camilla's heart tightened. Miguel had been fighting the same cough for weeks now. The prescription from the public clinic sat in her purse, unfilled, a luxury she couldn't afford until payday. And even then, the choice between medicine and rent loomed like a shadow. When the clock finally struck 9, Camilla gathered her cleaning supplies and headed to the employee locker room. She changed quickly, tucking her uniform into her worn backpack. In her wallet, all that remained was a single coin, enough perhaps, for a small loaf of bread that she could divide among the three of them for dinner. The night air hit her face as she stepped out of the towering office building, a stark change from the climate-controlled interior. November in Sao Paulo brought an unusual chill, and her thin jacket offered little protection. The 20-minute walk to the bus stop stretched before her, each step a reminder of the ache in her legs after standing for 10 hours. As she walked, Camilla mentally calculated her finances, a nightly ritual that only served to deepen the furrow between her eyebrows. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was still short by almost half. The electricity bill had arrived with a red warning stamp. Miguel needed medicine. Luisa needed new shoes for school. The list was endless, but the resources were finite. A particularly strong gust of wind made her shiver, pulling her from her thoughts. It was then that she noticed him, a figure huddled against the wall of a closed shop, arms wrapped around his knees in a futile attempt to generate warmth. His clothes were dirty but not ragged, his face gaunt but somehow dignified. This wasn't someone who had spent years on the streets. This was someone who had recently fallen through the cracks. Camilla slowed her pace. The man wasn't asking for money. He wasn't holding a sign or extending a cup. He was simply trying to disappear into the wall to become invisible to the indifferent passers-by. She should keep walking. The coin in her pocket was meant for her children's dinner. It was all she had, but something made her stop. Perhaps it was the way his shoulders trembled slightly, or how he kept his gaze fixed on the ground, as if eye contact might cost him his last shred of dignity. Without allowing herself to reconsider, Camilla approached him, her steps hesitant but determined. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, startled. His eyes were a deep brown, clouded with confusion and embarrassment at being addressed. Camilla reached into her pocket and pulled out her last coin. It gleamed under the streetlight, a small, insignificant object that somehow represented everything at that moment. "I don't have much," she said, extending her hand, "but please take this." The man stared at the coin, then at Camilla, disbelief etched across his features. "I can't." "Please," she insisted, placing it in his palm and closing his fingers around it. Everyone deserves a little kindness. For a brief moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a recognition of shared humanity amid desperation. Then, without waiting for a response, Camilla turned and continued her journey to the bus stop, her wallet now empty, but her heart somehow fuller. As the bus rattled through the streets of São Paulo, carrying her toward the outskirts where rent was just barely affordable, Camilla leaned her head against the window and watched the city blur into streaks of light. The knowledge that her children would go to bed hungry tonight weighed heavily upon her, yet she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. What she didn't know, as the bus turned the corner and disappeared into the night, was that the simple act of giving away her last coin was about to change everything. Dawn arrived without fanfare, seeping through the thin curtains of Camilla's modest two-room apartment. She had been awake for an hour already, preparing a meager breakfast of rice and the last of the beans. The children sat at the small table, Luisa helping Miguel with his spoon when his small hands trembled from coughing. "Mama, I'm still hungry," Miguel said, his voice raspy. Camilla swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know, meu amor. Tonight we'll have a feast, I promise." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was kinder than the truth. Luisa, wise beyond her 7 years, caught her mother's eye and nodded slightly. "I'll share my lunch with Miguel at school today," she whispered when her brother wasn't listening. Camilla's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. Her daughter shouldn't have to make such sacrifices. She shouldn't have to understand hunger so intimately. After dropping the children at school, promising to pick them up from Mrs. Pereira's after work, Camilla boarded the bus to Avenida Paulista, where the gleaming headquarters of Alves Incorporated rose 40 stories into the sky. Today was payday, a small reprieve in the constant struggle. Perhaps she could even pick up an extra shift over the weekend. The morning passed in a blur of mops, disinfectant, and the hum of vacuum cleaners. Camilla worked methodically, floor by floor alongside the other cleaning staff. There was comfort in the routine, in knowing exactly what was expected of her. Here, there were no surprises, no unexpected expenses or emergencies to derail her carefully planned budget. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the staff room, sipping water to quell the hunger pangs. She had given her lunch, a small sandwich, to Tiago, a new hire who had mentioned his family was still in the northeast, waiting for him to send money home. The familiar sacrifice brought the memory of last night's stranger to mind, and she wondered briefly if the single coin had helped him in any way. "Oliveira!" The sharp voice of Helena Barros, the cleaning supervisor, cut through the quiet. "Mr. Alves's office needs attention immediately. Someone spilled coffee all over the carpet." Camilla stood quickly, gathering her supplies. "Yes, ma'am. And don't forget, performance reviews are next week. Make sure you're giving your best." Helena's tone carried a thinly veiled threat. The top floor of Alves Incorporated housed only the most senior executives, including Ricardo Alves, the company's founder and CEO. Camilla had glimpsed him occasionally, always from a distance, a stern-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and a perpetual frown. The employees spoke of him in hushed tones, sharing stories of his ruthless business tactics and legendary temper. As she stepped off the elevator with her cleaning cart, Patricia, Mr. Alves's executive assistant, beckoned her over with a manicured hand. "Be quick about it," Patricia said, barely looking up from her computer. "He has a meeting in 30 minutes. Camilla nodded and wheeled her cart toward the imposing double doors of the CEO's office. She knocked softly, then entered when a gruff voice granted permission. The office was immense, with windows that offered a panoramic view of São Paulo. The furniture was all dark wood and leather, exuding an aura of power and wealth. In the center of it all, behind a desk the size of Camilla's kitchen, sat Ricardo Alves, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. "The carpet," he said without looking up, gesturing vaguely to a dark stain near the sitting area. "Yes, sir," Camilla replied, quickly setting to work with her carpet cleaner. As she knelt on the floor, diligently treating the stain, she felt rather than saw Mr. Alves's attention shift to her. The weight of his gaze made her hands tremble slightly, but she continued working, determined to do her job well. "You're new," he stated, though she had been working there for over a year. "No, sir. I've been with the company for 14 months. A pause. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Camilla finished removing the stain. When she stood, gathering her supplies, Mr. Alves was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said finally, the words sounding foreign on his lips. Surprised by the acknowledgement, Camilla managed a small smile before exiting the office, unaware that Ricardo Alves continued to stare at the door long after it closed behind her. The rest of the day passed without incident, and at 5 o'clock, Camilla joined the line of employees waiting to receive their paychecks. When her turn came, she accepted the envelope with thanks, resisting the urge to open it immediately. The amount would be the same as always, barely enough but all she had. She was halfway to the elevator when Helena's voice rang out again. "Oliveira, a word before you leave." Camilla's stomach dropped. Had she done something wrong? Was it about other spill in Mr. Alves's office? Helena led her to a small room used for employee evaluations, gesturing for her to sit. "There's been an incident," Helena began, her face stern. "Several bottles of cleaning solution have gone missing from the supply closet on your floor." Camilla blinked in confusion. "Missing?" "Yes, expensive products. And you were seen near the closet after hours yesterday." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Camilla's mind raced. She had indeed been in the supply closet late yesterday, restocking her cart as she always did before leaving. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice steady despite the fear mounting inside her. "I didn't take anything." Helena's lips thinned. "The evidence suggests otherwise. And given your situation, it's not hard to see why you might be tempted." Heat rose to Camilla's cheeks. Her situation was no secret, a single mother struggling to make ends meet. It was written in the worn edges of her shoes, the careful way she saved every paper towel, the empty space in front of her during lunch breaks. "I would never steal," she stated firmly, meeting Helena's gaze. "I need this job too much to risk it." "Nevertheless, Mr. Montero has made his decision." Helena slid a document across the table. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You'll receive this week's pay, but nothing more." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Camilla stared at the termination notice, the words blurring before her eyes. This couldn't be happening, not today, not when Miguel needed medicine and the rent was due, and Luisa's school had asked for money for a field trip, and— "This is a mistake," she whispered, more to herself than to Helena. "You can collect your personal belongings and leave. Security will escort you out." As if on cue, a uniformed guard appeared in the doorway, his expression impassive. Camilla stood on shaky legs, clutching her paycheck envelope like a lifeline. The walk to her locker felt like a march to the gallows, each step heavier than the last. Around her, co-workers averted their eyes or whispered behind their hands. Word had spread quickly. By morning, she would be forgotten, replaced by someone equally desperate for work, equally invisible. Outside, the early evening air was cool against her tear-streaked face. Camilla sat on a bench across from the imposing building that had, until moments ago, been her workplace. The reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. No job meant no income. No income meant no rent, no food, no medicine, no future. She opened the paycheck envelope with trembling fingers. The amount was exactly as expected, enough to cover rent or food and medicine, but not both. Choices would have to be made, sacrifices endured. Again. As pedestrians streamed past, their lives continuing unchanged, Camilla allowed herself 5 minutes of despair. 5 minutes to cry, to rage against the injustice, to wonder how she would tell her children. Then, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she stood up. There was no time for self-pity. She needed to find another job, immediately. With renewed determination, she headed toward the bus stop, mentally listing potential employers in the area. She had skills, she was hard-working, someone would hire her. They had to. What Camilla didn't notice, as she walked away with her head held high, was the black luxury car parked across the street, or the man inside watching her through tinted windows with an expression of deep contemplation. The apartment was quiet save for Miguel's labored breathing. Camilla sat at the edge of his bed, gently dabbing his forehead with a cool cloth. The fever had started shortly after dinner, a meal of borrowed rice from Mrs. Pereira, who had taken one look at Camilla's face upon her return and known something was terribly wrong. "You're going to feel better soon, meu amor," Camilla whispered. Though the prescription remained unfilled, the medicine cabinet empty save for a nearly depleted bottle of children's painkiller. From the doorway, Louisa watched, her small face serious. "Is he going to be okay, Mama?" "Of course he is. Your brother is strong, just like you." Camilla forced a smile. "Now it's late. You should be sleeping too." Reluctantly, Louisa retreated to the single bed they shared in the apartment's only bedroom. Miguel had been moved to the makeshift bed on the couch when his coughing worsened, to give him more air and to prevent Louisa from catching whatever he had. Once both children were asleep, Camilla allowed the mask to fall. At the small kitchen table, illuminated only by the streetlight filtering through the window, she spread out her meager finances and began the impossible task of making them stretch. The rent was non-negotiable. They needed a roof over their heads. Food could be reduced, though they were already eating as little as possible. Perhaps she could sell something. Her gaze swept the sparsely furnished apartment. There was little to sell, and what they had was essential. After hours of calculations and recalculations, the conclusion remained the same. Without a job, they would not survive the month. Sleep eluded her that night. She sat beside Miguel, monitoring his fever, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would visit the pharmacy first thing, filling Miguel's prescription with a portion of the rent money. Then she would spend the day visiting every business in walking distance, asking for work. Any work. As the first light of morning crept into the apartment, Camilla prepared a simple breakfast of toast, the last of their bread, and made sure Louisa was ready for school. "You'll pick us up from Mrs. Pereira's today?" Louisa asked, adjusting her worn backpack. "Actually, Miguel will stay home with me today. He needs rest." Louisa's eyes widened. "But who will take care of him if you're at work?" The innocent question landed like a blow. Camilla knelt down, meeting her daughter's gaze. "Mama won't be going to work today or tomorrow." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to be looking for a new job." "But why? Did you do something wrong?" "No, querida. Sometimes adults make mistakes about other adults. But don't worry. I'll find something new, something even better." Louisa considered this, then nodded. With the solemn acceptance that children sometimes show in the face of adult problems they don't fully understand. After walking Louisa to school, Camilla hurried to the pharmacy, Miguel's prescription clutched in her hand. The pharmacist, an older man with kind eyes, filled it quickly. "Make sure he finishes the entire course," he instructed as he handed over the medication, "even if he starts feeling better." Camilla nodded, counting out the bills from her dwindling funds. The amount made her wince, but Miguel's health was worth any price. Back at the apartment, she administered the first dose to a still feverish Miguel, tucking him in with promises of getting better soon. Then, changing into her most presentable outfit, a simple blouse and skirt reserved for special occasions, she prepared to begin her job search. "Mama has to go out for a little while," she told Miguel, kissing his forehead. "Mrs. Pereira will check on you every hour. You rest, okay?" Miguel nodded weakly, already drifting back to sleep as the medication took effect. The day stretched endlessly before her as Camilla walked from business to business. Cafes, shops, offices, anywhere that might need someone to clean, to serve, to help. Most turned her away immediately. A few took her information with non-committal promises to call if something opened up. None offered immediate work. By late afternoon, her feet aching and her spirit bruised, Camilla found herself in a part of the city she rarely visited, a neighborhood of upscale boutiques and expensive restaurants. She had wandered there almost unconsciously, drawn perhaps by desperation or the faint hope that wealthier establishments might pay better. Outside a particularly elegant restaurant, Camilla hesitated. The place exuded exclusivity, from the understated sign to the uniformed doorman. It was far beyond anywhere she would normally apply, but desperation made her bold. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, with soft lighting and the gentle clink of fine china. A host approached, his gaze skeptical, as he took in her simple attire. "May I help you?" His tone suggested he doubted he could. "I'm looking for work," Camilla said, straightening her posture. "Any position, cleaning, dishwashing, anything at all." The host's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but we're fully staffed at the moment." As she turned to leave, a voice called out from behind them. "Wait." A man emerged from what appeared to be an office, his tall frame clothed in an impeccable suit. He was middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and sharp, assessing eyes. "Eduardo Mendes," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I own this establishment." Camilla shook his hand, acutely aware of the contrast between his manicured nails and her work-roughened fingers. "Camila Oliveira." "What kind of work are you looking for, Ms. Oliveira?" The unexpected question caught her off guard. "Anything, sir. I clean, I organize, I learn quickly. I just need a job." Eduardo studied her for a moment. "Our dishwasher called in sick today. It's not permanent work, but we could use the help for the dinner shift. 7 hours paid at the end of the night." It wasn't a solution to her problems, but it was something. A few more days before the rent was due, a few more meals for her children. "Yes," she said immediately. "Thank you. When can I start?" "Now, if you're able, Julia will show you to the kitchen and get you set up." A young woman materialized beside them, gesturing for Camilla to follow. As they walked toward the back of the restaurant, Camilla felt Eduardo's gaze on her, curious and contemplative. The kitchen was a world apart from the serene dining room, hot, loud, and chaotic as the staff prepared for the evening rush. Julia led her to the dishwashing station, explaining the process and expectations before leaving her to work. For the next 7 hours, Camilla stood at the industrial sink, washing an endless stream of plates, glasses, and silverware. The water was scalding, the detergent harsh on her already chapped hands, but she worked without complaint. Each dish represented a fraction of what her children needed, a small step away from the edge she was teetering on. When the last customer departed and the kitchen began to wind down, Camilla's arms ached with a bone-deep weariness. But there was satisfaction too, in a job well done, in surviving another day. As she prepared to leave, Eduardo appeared in the FI's kitchen, observing the now clean workspace with approval. "You work hard," he noted, not a question but a statement of fact. "I have reason to," she replied simply. He nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. From his pocket, he withdrew an envelope, handing it to her. "Your pay for tonight. There's a bit extra. A thank you for coming in on such short notice." Camilla opened the envelope, her eyes widening at the amount. It was nearly double what she had expected. "This is too much," she began, but Eduardo shook his head. "It's fair and—" He hesitated, seemingly making a decision. "If you're interested, we could use someone like you more regularly. 3 nights a week, same rate." It wasn't full-time work, not enough to fully replace what she had lost, but it was a lifeline when she was drowning. "Yes," she said, gratitude, threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you, I won't let you down." As she left the restaurant, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks, Camilla felt a flicker of hope rekindle within her. It was a small beginning, but beginnings were all she needed. What she didn't know was that this encounter, like the one with the stranger the night before, was another thread in a tapestry being woven by forces beyond her understanding, a tapestry that would soon reveal its full pattern. The next morning brought a rare moment of peace to the Oliveira household. Miguel's fever had broken during the night, the medicine finally doing its work. He sat at the kitchen table with more energy than he had shown in days, coloring a picture, while Luisa helped him stay within the lines. Camilla watched them as she prepared a modest breakfast, bolstered by fresh bread and fruit, purchased with a small portion of last night's earnings. The relief of seeing Miguel improved was immeasurable, worth every blister on her hands, every ache in her back. "How are you feeling, meu amor?" she asked, placing a plate in front of him. "Better," Miguel declared, reaching eagerly for the bread. "Can I go to school today?" Camilla shook her head. "Not yet. The doctor said you need to rest for at least 3 days, but if you keep getting better, you can go on Monday." This compromise seemed to satisfy him, and he returned to his coloring with renewed focus. Luisa, however, kept glancing at Camila with questioning eyes. "What's wrong, querida?" Camila asked softly when Miguel was distracted. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" The question was simple but loaded with all the worries a 7-year-old shouldn't have to carry. Camila drew her daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Yes, we are, I promise. Mama has a new job now and everything will work out." It wasn't entirely true. The restaurant position was temporary and part-time, but in that moment, Camila needed to believe it as much as Luisa did. After seeing Luisa off to school with a proper lunch packed for the first time in weeks, Camila settled Miguel on the couch with his coloring books and turned her attention to the apartment. The place was clean but worn, with furniture salvaged from second-hand stores and repairs made with whatever materials were at hand. Still, it was home, the only stable environment her children had known since their father had walked out 3 years ago. The thought of João brought a familiar ache, not for the man himself, but for the security his presence had once provided. He had been a construction worker, his income modest but sufficient. Then the accident happened, a fall that left him with chronic back pain and an addiction to the painkillers prescribed for it. Within a year he was gone, leaving Camila with 2 small children, mounting debts, and the crushing weight of single parenthood. She was pulled from these memories by the sound of her phone, an old model with a cracked screen that she had been meaning to replace when finances allowed. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Ms. Oliveira?" The voice was female, professional, vaguely familiar. "This is Patricia Santos, Mr. Alves's executive assistant." Camila's heart skipped a beat. Why would someone from Alves Incorporated be calling her? "Yes, this is she. Mr. Alves would like to meet with you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Can you make yourself available?" The request was so unexpected that Camila found herself momentarily speechless. Ricardo Alves, the CEO who barely acknowledged her existence, wanted a meeting. After she had been fired for alleged theft. "May I ask what this is regarding?" she finally managed. "Mr. Alves prefers to discuss that in person. A car will be sent to pick you up at your residence at 2:30. Before Camila could respond, Patricia continued, her tone softening slightly. "And Ms. Oliveira, this is not about your termination, at least not in the way you might think." The call ended, leaving Camila staring at her phone in confusion. What could Ricardo Alves possibly want with her? Was he planning to press charges for the supposed theft? But then why send a car? And what did Patricia mean about it not being about her termination in the way she might think? The hours until 2:30 crawled by with excruciating slowness. Camila checked on Miguel regularly, cleaned the already spotless apartment, and changed her outfit 3 times, settling finally on a simple navy dress, the most professional thing she owned. Mrs. Pereira agreed to watch Miguel for a few hours, waving away Camila's thanks with a gnarled hand. "You would do the same for me," the old woman said, settling next to Miguel with her knitting. "Now go. And whatever this meeting is about, hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." The car that arrived at precisely 2:30 was sleek and black, with tinted windows and a uniformed driver who opened the door for her with formal courtesy. As they drove through the busy streets of São Paulo, Camila's anxiety mounted. What awaited her at Alves Incorporated? To her surprise, the car didn't stop at the main headquarters, but continued to a quieter, more exclusive part of the city, eventually pulling up to a standalone building with the Alves logo discreetly displayed at the entrance. "Mr. Alves's private office," the driver explained, opening her door. "Patricia will meet you inside." The lobby was elegantly minimalist with marble floors and muted lighting. Patricia, impeccably dressed as always, greeted her with a professional smile. "Thank you for coming, Miss Oliveira. Mr. Alves is ready." "For you?" She led Camila through a series of corridors to a set of double doors, knocking once before opening them. "Ms. Oliveira is here, sir." Ricardo Alves stood by the window, his back to the door, silhouetted against the afternoon light. When he turned, Camila was struck by the intensity of his gaze, direct and assessing as if measuring her worth with a single look. "Ms. Oliveira, please sit down." Camila perched on the edge of a leather chair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. She would not cower, regardless of what this meeting entailed. Ricardo remained standing, studying her with an unreadable expression. "You're probably wondering why I've asked you here." "Yes, sir." "2 nights ago you encountered a man on the street, a homeless man. You gave him your last coin." Camilla's breath caught in her throat. How could he possibly know about that? "That man," Ricardo continued, "was conducting an experiment in empathy, a test, if you will, to see how people would react to someone in need." He moved to sit behind his desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. "That man was me." The revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. Ricardo Alves, billionaire CEO, notorious for his ruthlessness in business, had been the huddled figure. On the sidewalk? It seemed impossible, ludicrous even. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Once a year I spend a week living as the most vulnerable in our society do. No money, no identification, no safety net. It keeps me grounded, reminds me of the realities that exist beyond boardrooms and balance sheets." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if such behavior was perfectly reasonable for one of Brazil's wealthiest men. "In all the years I've done this, you are the first person who gave me everything they had, expecting nothing in return. Do you know what that coin meant to you? What you sacrificed by giving it away?" Camilla swallowed hard, remembering the hunger pangs that had kept her awake that night, the promises to her children she couldn't keep. "It meant dinner for my children. But they survived without it." Ricardo's expression shifted, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "And yesterday you were fired, accused of theft." "Yes, but I didn't." He held up a hand. "I know. I've reviewed the security footage myself. There was no theft. Gabriel Montero manufactured the accusation because he needed to reduce staff costs, and you were an easy target." The confirmation of her innocence should have been satisfying, but all Camilla felt was a hollow ache. Knowing she was right didn't change the fact that she had lost her job, that her children's security hung by a thread. "Mr. Montero has been terminated," Ricardo continued, "as has Helena Barros. Their behavior was unacceptable." Camilla absorbed this information in silence. 2 people had lost their jobs, just as she had. Should she feel vindicated? She wasn't sure. "As for you, Ms. Oliveira," Ricardo leaned forward, his gaze direct. "I would like to offer you a position." Hope flickered briefly, then dimmed. Probably another cleaning job, perhaps with slightly better pay. It would help, of course, but it wouldn't fundamentally change their circumstances. "What position?" she asked cautiously. "My personal assistant." The words didn't register at first. When they did, Camilla was certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry. Patricia is moving to our international division next month. I need someone to replace her. Someone I can trust, someone with integrity. But I don't have qualifications. I've never been an assistant. I don't have a degree or... Skills can be learned. Education can be acquired. Character, however, is inherent." Ricardo's tone was firm. "You gave away your last coin to help a stranger. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Camilla's mind raced. The salary of an executive assistant at Alves Incorporated would be more than she had ever earned, could ever hope to earn as a cleaner. It would mean security for her children, a future beyond mere survival. "The position comes with a competitive salary, full benefits, and flexible hours to accommodate your family responsibilities," Ricardo continued. "Patricia will train you for the next month and will provide any additional education or certifications you might need." It was too much, too sudden. A day ago, she had been a desperate single mother with no job and dwindling hope. Now this man, this stranger who had witnessed her moment of kindness, was offering her a lifeline so substantial it threatened to overwhelm her. "Why?" she managed finally, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this for me?" Ricardo was silent for a long moment, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Because 14 years ago I was in your position. A single parent struggling to provide, thinking I had reached the end of my options. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most, expecting nothing in return. I'm simply passing that kindness forward." He extended his hand across the desk. "Do you accept?" Camilla looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. In his eyes she saw not pity, but respect, an acknowledgement of her worth as a person, not just as a potential employee. With a steadiness that surprised even herself, Camilla reached out and shook his hand. "Yes, I accept." As their hands clasped, sealing a contract more meaningful than any legal document, neither could have predicted how this connection would change not only Camilla's life, but Ricardo's as well. How a single coin, given in kindness, would set in motion events that would transform them both in ways they could never have imagined. The Alves Incorporated headquarters buzzed with energy on Monday morning as employees streamed through the revolving doors, coffee cups in hand, preparing for another week of corporate ambition. Among them, noticeably out of place in her new blazer and pencil skirt, purchased over the weekend with an advance from Ricardo, was Camilla Oliveira. She clutched her temporary ID badge like a talisman, her stomach a knot of anxiety and excitement. The security guard who had escorted her out in disgrace just 3 days earlier now nodded respectfully as she passed through the checkpoint. 38th floor, Patricia instructed as they entered the elevator. "Mr. Alves's office suite. You'll have a desk in the anteroom." The elevator climbed swiftly, carrying them past the floors where Camilla had once cleaned, past the executive levels where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made daily. At the 38th floor, the doors opened to reveal an elegantly appointed reception area, all glass and polished wood. "This is your workspace," Patricia said, gesturing to a sleek desk positioned strategically outside Ricardo's office. "From here, you'll manage his calendar, coordinate meetings, handle correspondence, and generally ensure his day runs smoothly." Camilla ran her fingers lightly over the surface of the desk, her desk. It seemed impossible that just days ago she had been emptying the trash can beside it. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted softly. Patricia's professional demeanor softened slightly. "You wouldn't be here if Mr. Alves didn't believe you could. And for what it's worth, I agree with him." The morning passed in a whirlwind of information. Passwords, protocols, software systems, filing methods. Camilla absorbed it all with intense concentration, determined not to squander this opportunity. Each new skill she learned, each process she mastered, represented a step further from the precarious existence she had known. At noon, Patricia paused their training. "Mr. Alves would like you to join him for lunch. It's a working meal. You'll observe how he handles informal business discussions." Camilla followed Patricia to a private dining room where Ricardo was already seated with 2 men in expensive suits. He stood as they entered, gesturing for Camilla to take the seat to his right. "Gentlemen, this is Camilla Oliveira, my new assistant. Camilla, meet Carlos Ferreira and Antonio Duarte, 2 of our most valued partners." The men regarded her with polite curiosity, clearly wondering about her sudden appearance in Ricardo's inner circle. Camilla nodded respectfully, hyper-aware of every movement, every word. Throughout the meal, she observed Ricardo, his commanding presence, the careful way he listened, how he directed the conversation without seeming to control it. She took mental notes, recognizing that her role would require her to anticipate his needs, to understand his methods. When the meeting concluded and the men departed, Ricardo turned to her. "Your thoughts?" Caught off guard by the question, Camilla hesitated. "About the meeting?" "Yes, what did you observe?" She considered carefully before answering. Mr. Ferreira seemed reluctant about the proposed timeline. He kept returning to the subject, even after you moved the conversation forward. Ricardo nodded, a spark of approval in his eyes. "And Duarte?" He deferred to Ferreira on most points, but when the discussion turned to marketing, he became more assertive. "I think that's his area of expertise." "Very good." Ricardo's assessment was simple but carried weight. "Continue with Patricia this afternoon. Tomorrow you'll attend my meetings alone." As they walked back to the office, Patricia gave Camilla a sidelong glance. "He doesn't usually ask for opinions from new staff." "Is that bad?" "No." Patricia's lips curved in a small smile. "It means he sees something in you that interests him. Just be careful." "Careful?" "Ricardo Alves is a complex man, brilliant, generous in his way, but—" She paused, choosing her words with precision. "He keeps people at a distance. Even those closest to him professionally rarely glimpse the man behind the CEO. The warning, subtle as it was, stayed with Camilla as she continued her training that afternoon. What had Patricia meant? Was there something she should be wary of? As the workday ended, Camilla gathered her things, still adjusting to the novelty of regular hours and the luxury of leaving while the sun was still high in the sky. She would be able to pick up the children herself today, prepare dinner without rushing, perhaps even help Louisa with her homework. The thought brought a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This job wasn't just a salary, it was time with her children, presence in their lives in ways that had been impossible before. She was walking toward the elevator when her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Oliveira, this is Eduardo Mendez from Restaurante Nova. I was expecting you tonight." Camilla froze. In the whirlwind of the weekend, she had completely forgotten about the dishwashing position she had accepted. "Mr. Mendez, I'm so sorry. There's been a change in my circumstances. I should have called. Is everything all right?" His concerns seemed genuine. "Yes. Better than all right, actually. I've been offered a full-time position elsewhere." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Well, that's disappointing for us, but wonderful for you. May I ask where?" "Alves Incorporated. I'm working as an assistant to Mr. Alves." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise. "Ricardo Alves, the Ricardo Alves. Yes? That's quite a change from dishwashing." His tone held no judgment, only curiosity. "It's a long story," Camilla said, unsure how much to share. "I imagine it is." Eduardo sounded thoughtful. "Well, Ms. Oliveira, it seems the universe has plans for you. I wish you all the best. Thank you for understanding, and for the opportunity you gave me when I needed it." As she ended the call, Camilla realized that Patricia was standing nearby, having overheard at least part of the conversation. "Dishwashing?" Patricia asked, her eyebrow raised. Camilla straightened her shoulders. "After I was fired, I needed work. Any work." Something like respect flickered in Patricia's eyes. "You're full of surprises, Camilla Oliveira. I think you might just survive here after all." The bus ride home was filled with plans and possibilities. With her first month's salary, she could pay off their outstanding bills. By the third month, perhaps they could move to a safer neighborhood, one with better schools for the children. By the end of the year, she might even start saving for Louisa and Miguel's education. Dreams that had seemed impossible just days ago now felt within reach, like stars that had suddenly descended from the sky to rest in her open palms. When she picked up the children from Mrs. Pereira's apartment, their eyes widened at the sight of her new clothes, her earlier arrival. "Mama, you look like a businesswoman," Louisa exclaimed, touching the sleeve of the blazer with reverence. "That's because I am one now, querida." Camilla knelt, gathering them both into a tight embrace. "Things are going to be different from now. I'm better." Miguel, still recovering but much improved, wrapped his small arms around her neck. "Does that mean we can have ice cream for dinner?" Camilla laughed, a sound of pure joy that had been rare in their home for too long. "Not for dinner, but maybe for dessert." As they walked home together, Camilla holding a child's hand in each of hers, she marveled at how quickly life could change, how a single act of kindness, offered without expectation of return, had altered their trajectory so completely. What she didn't yet understand was that the transformation had only just begun for all of them. The month that followed was a period of intense adjustment for Camilla. Each day brought new challenges, new skills to master, new aspects of Ricardo Alves to understand and anticipate. Patricia proved to be a rigorous but fair teacher, guiding Camilla through the complex web of corporate politics and procedures with patient precision. "Always confirm information before passing it to Ricardo," Patricia advised. "He values accuracy above all else." "Never interrupt him during his thinking time," she warned. "Those 2 hours in the morning are sacred." "Learn to read his moods," she suggested. "When his jaw tightens, change the subject. When he drums his fingers, he's impatient for your conclusion." Camilla absorbed these lessons and more, building a mental catalogue of Ricardo's preferences, habits, and methods. She learned that he took his coffee black in the morning but with a splash of milk after noon, that he preferred written reports to verbal ones, that he had an uncanny memory for details mentioned in passing months earlier. What she couldn't learn from Patricia was the man himself. Ricardo remained an enigma, professionally warm but personally distant. He never mentioned their encounter on the street or his reasons for elevating her so dramatically. It was as if that night had been sealed away, significant but not to be discussed. At home, the changes were more visible, more immediate. They had moved to a new apartment, still modest but in a safer neighborhood, with 2 proper bedrooms, and a small balcony where Miguel liked to watch the street below. The children attended a better school, one with art classes and a computer lab that fascinated Luisa. There was food in the refrigerator, medicine in the cabinet, new clothes in their drawers. Yet amid these positive changes, Camilla sometimes caught herself looking over her shoulder, waiting for it all to disappear. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, a shadow at the edges of her new life, whispering that such good fortune couldn't possibly last. These thoughts were on her mind one evening as she prepared dinner, Luisa setting the table, while Miguel arranged his toy cars in elaborate patterns on the living room floor. "Mama, Daniel invited me to his birthday party," Luisa announced carefully, placing forks beside the plates. "It's at the Science Museum. Can I go?" Before, such invitations had been sources of anxiety, the expectation of a gift they couldn't afford, the admission fee, the comparison with other parents who didn't count, coins for bus fare. Now Camilla could simply smile and say, "Of course, we'll find him a nice present this weekend." The simple joy on Luisa's face, the absence of the worry that had often clouded her young eyes, made Camilla's throat tighten with emotion. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Camilla wiped her hands on a towel, puzzled. They rarely had visitors, especially unannounced ones. Opening the door revealed a courier holding a large package. "Delivery for Camila Oliveira," he announced, presenting a digital pad for her signature. The package, when opened, contained a sleek laptop and a note in Ricardo's distinctive handwriting. "For your coursework, the software you'll need is already installed. Ray." Camilla stared at the gift, overwhelmed by its implication. Last week, during a rare personal conversation, she had mentioned her interest in taking online courses to formalize her administrative skills. Ricardo had listened politely but said nothing. She had assumed he'd forgotten the comment amidst the 100 other details that occupied his mind daily. Clearly, he had not. The next morning, she entered his office earlier than usual, the laptop tucked under her arm. Ricardo was already at his desk, reviewing documents with his usual intensity. "Thank you for the laptop," she said, standing in the doorway. "It's incredibly generous, but I can't accept such an expensive gift." Ricardo looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's not a gift. It's an investment in your professional development, which benefits the company. Still, I should pay for it myself. I can afford to now, thanks to you." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention, a rarity that emphasized the importance of the moment. "Camilla, when I was starting out, someone gave me opportunities I hadn't earned, books I couldn't afford, introductions I didn't deserve. At the time, I thought it was charity. It took me years to understand it was investment, not just in me, but in what I could become." He gestured to the chair across from him, an invitation she tentatively accepted. "The laptop is yours," he continued. "Use it for your courses. Learn everything you can, and someday when you're in a position to help someone else, do it without hesitation. That's all the repayment I require." The sincerity in his voice struck Camilla deeply. This was a glimpse of the man behind the CEO, the one Patricia had suggested existed but remained hidden from view. "I will," she promised. "Thank you." Ricardo nodded, then returned to his documents. The moment of connection closed as quickly as it had opened, but something had shifted between them. A thin veil lifted to reveal a more complex relationship than employer and employee. As the weeks passed, these moments occurred with increasing frequency. Brief insights into Ricardo's thoughts, his values, the experiences that had shaped him, never shared directly, always emerging obliquely through comments about business decisions or responses to situations they encountered. Camilla learned that he had a daughter, Sophia, who studied in Europe and rarely came home, that his wife had died of cancer 12 years earlier, that he had built Alves Incorporated from a small family business into a multinational corporation through a combination of vision, calculated risk, and uncompromising standards. What she couldn't determine was why he remained so isolated, so guarded, despite his evident capacity for generosity and understanding. It was as if he had constructed walls around himself so thick that even those closest to him could only glimpse what lay beyond. Her own life had settled into a new rhythm, more comfortable than before but no less busy. Between her work responsibilities, the children's activities, and her online courses, every hour was accounted for. Yet she found satisfaction in this, fullness in the knowledge that her efforts were building something sustainable for her family. The month of Patricia's training ended, and Camilla officially assumed the role of Ricardo's executive assistant. The transition was smoother than anyone had expected, a testament to both Patricia's thoroughness and Camilla's natural aptitude for the position. "You've surprised everyone," Patricia told her on her last day, "especially Ricardo. He doesn't." "Admit it, but I can tell." "How?" Patricia smiled enigmatically. "He talks to you, the real him, not just the CEO. That's rare." After Patricia's departure, Camilla settled more fully into her role, developing her own systems and methods, while maintaining the high standards her predecessor had established. Ricardo seemed to approve of her adaptations, occasionally commenting on improvements she had implemented. They fell into a productive partnership, with Camilla gradually taking on more responsibilities as she proved her capabilities. She began drafting correspondence, preparing reports, and eventually representing Ricardo in preliminary meetings with clients and partners. It was during one such meeting, with a potential investor from Argentina, that Camilla encountered her first significant challenge. The investor, a middle-aged man named Javier Morales, had requested information about Alves Incorporated's expansion plans, details that Ricardo had explicitly marked as confidential. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morales," Camilla said politely but firmly. "That information isn't available at this stage of our discussions." Morales leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Ms. Oliveira, I'm prepared to invest a considerable sum in this company. Surely Ricardo wouldn't want you to obstruct such an opportunity." The use of Ricardo's first name, a familiarity Morales had not earned, set off warning bells in Camilla's mind. So did his attempt to circumvent established protocols. "Mr. Alves values transparency," she replied carefully, "but he also values process. If you're serious about investing, I'd be happy to arrange a meeting where he can discuss these matters with you directly." "I don't have time for games," Morales snapped. "Perhaps you don't understand the opportunity you're jeopardizing, or perhaps you're simply not qualified for your position." The implication was clear, a reminder of her background, her lack of formal education, her recent elevation from cleaning staff to executive suite. It was a calculated attempt to undermine her confidence, to make her doubt her judgment. 6 months ago, it might have worked. The Camilla who had given away her last coin would have faltered, intimidated by wealth and status. But that Camilla had been transformed, not just by circumstance but by her own growing belief in her worth. "Mr. Morales," she said, rising from her seat with quiet dignity, "I understand perfectly what's at stake, and I'm exactly as qualified as Mr. Alves believes me to be. Now, would you like me to schedule that meeting, or should we conclude our discussion here?" Morales stared at her, clearly recalculating his approach. After a moment, he smiled tightly. "Schedule the meeting for tomorrow, if possible." Later, as Camilla recounted the interaction to Ricardo, she wondered if she had overstepped, if her firmness had risked an important business relationship. To her surprise, Ricardo laughed, a genuine sound rarely heard in the office. "Morales was testing you. It's a tactic he uses with new executives. You passed admirably." "Testing me? Why?" "To see if you could be manipulated. If you had shared that information, he would have known you were either easily intimidated or fundamentally disloyal. Either way, it would have given him leverage." Camilla absorbed this insight, adding it to her growing understanding of the complex world she now inhabited. "And you're not concerned that I might have offended him. Morales respects strength. You showed him that you can't be bullied or flattered into betraying a confidence." Ricardo's expression grew more serious. "That quality is rare, Camilla, and invaluable to me." The approval in his voice filled her with a warmth that lingered long after the conversation ended. It wasn't just professional satisfaction. It was the sense that she had found her place, that she belonged in this role despite the unconventional path that had led her to it. What Camilla didn't realize was that this interaction had cemented something in Ricardo's mind as well, a growing conviction that the instinct that had prompted him to elevate her so dramatically had been not just correct, but perhaps more significant than he had initially understood. Neither of them could have predicted how this realization would shape what was to come, or how soon they would both be tested in ways far more challenging than a manipulative investor. 6 months into Camilla's new role, the rhythm of their professional partnership had solidified into something both efficient and oddly comfortable. Ricardo's demanding standards never wavered, but his trust in her judgment had grown steadily, resulting in a level of autonomy that surprised even veteran employees of Alves Incorporated. "He lets you make decisions about the Santos contract?" Carlos, the finance director, had asked incredulously after a meeting where Camilla had confidently outlined terms Ricardo had authorized her to negotiate. "Within parameters," she had replied, neither apologetic nor boastful, simply matter of fact. The truth was that Ricardo had come to rely on her unique perspective, one shaped by experiences vastly different from those of his usual advisors. Her insight into how policies affected employees at all levels, her ability to anticipate unintended consequences, her instinctive understanding of when compassion should temper business logic, all had proven surprisingly valuable. On a personal level, however, the walls around Ricardo remained largely intact. Glimpses beyond them were rare and fleeting. A comment about his late wife's favorite opera, a photograph of his daughter he kept in his desk drawer, an occasional reference to his own early struggles. Camilla had learned to respect these boundaries, while quietly noting each revelation, piecing together the fragments to form a more complete picture of the man she served. At home, the transformation in her family's circumstances continued to unfold. Luisa had blossomed academically, her natural intelligence finally nurtured by teachers who recognized her potential. Miguel's health had stabilized, his once persistent coughs now rare enough to be notable. And Camilla herself had completed 2 professional certifications, the framed credentials hanging proudly in her living room. Life had acquired a stability she had once thought beyond reach, not luxury but comfort, not ease but purpose. Each morning she woke with a sense of direction that had been absent during the years of mere survival. It was on a crisp Thursday, in August, that this carefully constructed new reality began to shift once again. The day started normally enough. Camilla arrived at the office early, reviewed Ricardo's schedule, and prepared the files he would need for his morning meetings. When he arrived, she briefed him on overnight developments with their Asian partnerships, noting the points that would require his attention. Ricardo listened with his usual focused intensity, asking occasional clarifying questions. There was nothing to suggest that this day would be different from any other. The first indication came mid-morning when Patricia, now head of international operations, called unexpectedly. "Camilla, is he with you?" Her tone was urgent, lacking its usual composure. "He's in a meeting. What's wrong?" "Turn on the financial news. Now." Camilla switched on the television mounted on her office wall, normally used for video conferences. The screen filled with a news anchor looking grave, a ticker scrolling rapidly beneath him with stock prices in alarming red. Allegations of fraud at Alves Incorporated have sent stocks plummeting this morning. Anonymous sources claim that financial reports from the company's European division have been falsified for the past 3 quarters, potentially hiding losses in the billions. Camilla felt the blood drain from her face. This was impossible. She had seen those reports herself, had discussed them with Ricardo and the finance team. There had been no irregularities, no concerns raised by anyone involved. "Patricia, This can't be right. It isn't, Patricia confirmed grimly. But the damage is being done anyway. The stock is down 20% already and falling. You need to get Ricardo out of that meeting immediately. Camilla didn't hesitate. She entered the conference room where Ricardo was discussing a new project with the development team, her expression signaling the urgency of the interruption. I apologize for the interruption, but Mr. Alves is needed urgently. Ricardo, attuned to her cues after months of working closely together, simply nodded and excused himself. Following her back to his office where the news was still playing, the allegations now accompanied by footage of Alves' Incorporated headquarters and graphs depicting the stock's precipitous fall. He watched in silence for several minutes, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. Call the board, emergency meeting in 30 minutes, then get me Fernando from legal and Maria from finance, and contact our PR team. No statements until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Camilla moved swiftly, making the calls while Ricardo continued to watch the unfolding crisis, his posture rigid, his eyes never leaving the screen. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The board meeting was tense, with several members openly panicking about the allegations and their potential personal liability. Fernando presented legal options, while Maria worked frantically to compile evidence that would refute the fraud claims. Through it all, Ricardo remained the eye of the storm, methodical, focused, betraying no anxiety despite the gravity of the situation. It was only when Camilla brought him coffee late in the afternoon, entering his office after everyone else had departed to execute their assigned tasks, that she glimpsed what lay beneath the controlled exterior. He stood at the window, his back to the door, his reflection in the glass revealing a face lined with fatigue and something deeper, a profound weariness that spoke of battles fought long before this one. "It's Morales," he said without turning, having sensed her presence. "This has his fingerprints all over it." Camila set the coffee on his desk. The investor from Argentina? But why? What would he gain from damaging Alves? Ricardo turned, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely vulnerable. "Because I refused to sell him what he really wanted, our technology patents. The investment proposal was just a cover to gain access to our research, and now he's trying to devalue the company so he can acquire it at a fraction of its worth," Camilla realized, the pieces falling into place. "Exactly." Ricardo picked up the coffee, his hand steady despite everything. "It's a strategy he's used, before though never so aggressively. Anonymous allegations, media manipulation, strategic stock sales to accelerate the panic. But if we can prove the allegations are false, by the time we do, the damage will be severe, possibly irreversible." He took a sip of coffee, his gaze distant. "I've spent 20 years building this company, Camilla. 20 years of sacrifice, of difficult choices, of putting the business above everything else in my life." The raw emotion in his voice struck her deeply. This wasn't just about money or corporate survival. It was personal in a way she hadn't fully understood until this moment. "We won't let him win," she said with quiet conviction. Ricardo looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You say we. Of course. I'm part of this company too." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Most people would be updating their resumes right now, preparing for the worst. I'm not most people." She held his gaze steadily. "And neither are you, so what's our next move?" The question seemed to refocus him, to pull him back from the edge of the abyss he had been contemplating. "We need to track the source of the allegations, find proof of Morales' involvement, and we need to shore up confidence among our major clients before they start canceling contracts." "I'll contact Paolo in cybersecurity about tracing the source," Camilla said, already mentally outlining a plan. "And I can draft personalized messages to our top 20 clients for your review." Ricardo nodded, but then hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his manner. "Camilla, you should know that if this goes badly, everyone associated with me will be affected. Your reputation, your career prospects, they could all suffer." The warning was clear, an offer of distance that she could accept or decline. It was perhaps the most personal thing he had ever said to her, an acknowledgement of concern for her welfare beyond the boundaries of their professional relationship. "I understand the risks," she replied simply. "I'm staying." Something shifted in Ricardo's expression, a softening, a moment of genuine connection that transcended employer and employee. Then he straightened, the mantle of CEO settling back onto his shoulders. "Then let's get to work." The next days were a test of endurance and resolve. The allegations expanded, with supposed whistleblowers emerging to claim knowledge of widespread corruption within Alves Incorporated. The stock continued to fall, though more slowly as initial panic gave way to uncertainty. Clients called hourly, seeking reassurance that their projects and investments were secure. Camilla worked alongside Ricardo with single-minded focus, sleeping only a few hours each night on the couch in her office. Mrs. Pereira had moved temporarily into her apartment to care for the children, sending Camilla photos and messages that served as vital reminders of why she couldn't surrender to exhaustion. On the third day of the crisis, a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. One of the cleaning staff, overhearing Camilla discussing the situation with Paulo while getting coffee, approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Oliveira, but I think I might have information that could help." The woman, Daniela, explained that she cleaned the offices of a financial news service in the same building. 2 nights ago, she had overheard a reporter talking on the phone about a big payday for running a story about Alves, mentioning that the Argentine wants it front page. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was a thread that could be pulled. Paulo immediately began investigating the reporter, while Camila took the information to Ricardo. His response was unexpected. Instead of pursuing the reporter directly, he made a single phone call to a contact at a rival news organization, offering exclusive access to evidence that would expose both Morales' scheme and the journalistic malpractice involved, but only if they moved quickly and discreetly. "Why not go public immediately with what we know?" Camilla asked after he hung up. "Because direct defense looks desperate. We need a third party to make the case for us." His eyes held a glint of strategic calculation. "And we need to let Morales think he's winning for just a little longer." The plan worked with devastating effectiveness. Within 24 hours, the rival news organization published a detailed expose on Morales' history of corporate sabotage, complete with evidence of payments to the reporter who had broken the original story about Alves. The reaction was immediate. The financial markets, already beginning to question the fraud allegations due to the lack of substantiating evidence, seized on this new information. Alves stock began to recover, while Morales found himself the subject of regulatory inquiries in multiple countries. By the end of the week, the crisis had largely passed. The company's reputation had suffered some damage, but the swift and strategic response had contained what could have been a catastrophe. Ricardo had emerged not as a suspected fraudster, but as the victim of a sophisticated attack, his handling of the situation enhancing rather than diminishing his standing in the business community. In the aftermath, as the executive team gathered to assess the damage and plan recovery strategies, Ricardo made an announcement that stunned everyone present. "This incident has made one thing clear," he stated, his gaze moving around the table before settling on Camilla. "Our leadership structure needs to evolve. Therefore, I am creating a new position, Chief of Staff, to oversee internal operations and serve as my direct representative in matters requiring executive authority." He paused, allowing the implications to register. "Camila Oliveira will assume this role, effective immediately." The room fell silent, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to outright displeasure. Camilla herself sat frozen, unable to process what she had just heard. "With all due respect, Ricardo," Carlos from Finance began carefully, "Ms. Oliveira has been with the company for less than a year. There are others with far more experience, and—" "Experience isn't always measured in years," Ricardo interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "During this crisis, when some of our longest-serving executives were paralyzed by panic or self-interest, Camilla demonstrated judgment, loyalty, and strategic thinking of the highest order. Those are the qualities I value, not length of service." His gaze returned to Camilla, who had yet to find her voice. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to remain in your current role. It was a genuine question, not a formality, an acknowledgement that this promotion would dramatically alter her life yet again, bringing new responsibilities, new pressures, new challenges. For a moment, Camilla thought of her children, of the stability she had worked so hard to create for them, of the balance she had finally achieved between work and family. This new role would disrupt that balance, demand even more of her time and energy. But then she thought of what it would mean, not just for her future, but for others like her. People who had been told their entire lives that certain doors were closed to them, that certain heights were unreachable. "I accept," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you for your trust." Ricardo nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Then it's settled. We'll discuss the details tomorrow." As the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, some offering stiff congratulations while others avoided her gaze entirely, Ricardo remained seated, indicating that Camilla should stay as well. When they were alone, he spoke with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I should have discussed this with you privately first. I apologize for the abruptness." "It's all right," Camilla assured him, still processing the enormity of what had just occurred. "But I have to ask, why me? There are others more qualified, with more education, more connections." Ricardo was silent for a long moment, contemplating his answer. "Do you remember what I told you the day we met, about someone giving me a chance when I needed it most?" Camilla nodded. "What I didn't tell you is that the person who helped me was my wife, Isabella." His voice softened at the name. "She came from wealth, from privilege. I was a nobody with ambition but no resources. Everyone warned her that I was using her for her family's connections." He looked down at his hands, then back at Camilla. "She ignored them all and believed in me anyway. She saw something in me that others couldn't or wouldn't see, just as I see something in you." The personal revelation, so rare from Ricardo, rendered Camilla momentarily speechless. "I won't let you down," she finally managed, the promise encompassing far more than professional performance. "I know." The two simple words conveyed absolute certainty. "Now go home to your children. They've hardly seen you this week." As Camilla gathered her things, preparing to return to her family after the most transformative week of her professional life, she knew that something fundamental had changed between her and Ricardo. The walls he maintained so carefully had not come down entirely, but a door had been opened, one that offered a glimpse of the man beyond the CEO, the human being beneath the carefully constructed persona. What neither of them realized in that moment was how significant that opening would become, or how soon they would both be forced to confront truths about themselves and each other that would transform their relationship in ways neither had anticipated. Camilla's first month as chief of staff was a baptism by fire. The promotion had elevated her above executives with decades more experience, creating a minefield of resentment and skepticism that she navigated with cautious determination. Carlos from finance was openly hostile, questioning her decisions in meetings and undermining her authority with subtle comments to other department heads. Elena from human resources was more diplomatic, but equally resistant, frequently forgetting to include Camilla in communications regarding senior staffing decisions. Only Maria from the legal department and Paolo from cybersecurity offered genuine support, recognizing that Ricardo's choice, however unexpected, had been deliberate and definitive. Ricardo himself remained typically distant in public, treating Camilla with the same professional respect he showed other executives, neither defending nor explaining his decision to elevate her so dramatically. But in private meetings, he provided guidance and context that proved invaluable as she found her footing in the new role. "Carlos is threatened because you have direct access to me," he explained after a particularly tense executive committee meeting. "His power has always come from controlling financial information. You bypass that control. Should I try to reassure him? Make it clear I'm not a threat to his position?" Ricardo considered this, then shook his head. "No, let him worry. It will keep him honest. Just focus on doing your job exceptionally well. Results silence critics more effectively than words. It was pragmatic advice, reflective of the ruthless efficiency that had built Alves Incorporated. Yet Camilla found herself wondering if there might be a middle path, one that acknowledged the value of Ricardo's strategic thinking while incorporating her own instinct for building bridges rather than walls. At home, the promotion brought both benefits and challenges. The substantial salary increase allowed Camilla to finally create a solid financial foundation for her family, opening savings accounts for the children's education, investing in a small property on the outskirts of São Paulo, even hiring a part-time housekeeper to manage daily chores. But the demands of the position also meant longer hours, more travel, and less time with Luisa and Miguel. Camilla did her best to compensate, being fully present when she was home, involving them in her weekend activities, creating new family rituals to replace the daily interactions that were no longer possible. "Why do you have to work on Saturday?" Miguel asked one morning, watching with disappointment as she prepared to leave for an emergency meeting. Camilla knelt to his level, smoothing his unruly hair. "Because my job is important, mi amor. Just like your schoolwork is important." "Is it more important than us?" The innocent question pierced her heart. "No," she said firmly. "Nothing is more important than you and Luisa. That's why I work so hard, to give you opportunities I never had." Miguel seemed to consider this, his young face serious. "Okay, but can we have ice cream when you come back?" The simple request, so normal and childlike, filled Camilla with relief. Despite the changes in their lives, her son was still just a boy who wanted ice cream with his mother. "Absolutely. The biggest Sundays they have." As weeks passed, Camilla began to find her rhythm in the new position. She developed systems for managing the increased workload, delegated tasks that didn't require her direct attention, and gradually won over some of the skeptics through consistent performance and a refusal to engage in office politics. Her relationship with Ricardo evolved as well, settling into a partnership based on complementary strengths. Where he was strategic, she was practical. Where he saw the broad market implications, she considered the human impact. Where he tended toward isolation, she built connections. Together, they navigated a series of challenges that tested both the company and their working relationship. A labor dispute at one of their manufacturing facilities, a potential acquisition that required delicate negotiation, a technological breakthrough that could either revolutionize their product line or drain resources with no guarantee of return. Through these shared experiences, Camilla gained insight into Ricardo's decision-making process, the careful weighing of variables, the calculated risks, the occasional intuitive leaps that seemed to defy logic yet consistently yielded results. She learned to anticipate his questions, prepare the information he would need, and present alternatives that balanced business objectives with ethical considerations. For his part, Ricardo came to rely on Camilla's perspective, valuing her ability to see beyond spreadsheets and market projections to the real-world implications of corporate decisions. He began to include her in discussions about long-term strategy, territory once reserved for the most senior executives and board members. This professional closeness inevitably led to a gradual thawing of personal boundaries. Conversations that once ended abruptly when they strayed from business topics now occasionally continued, revealing fragments of their lives beyond the office. Ricardo shared stories of Sophia's childhood, his voice softening when he described her first steps or the science project they had built together the year before Isabella's illness. Camilla spoke of the challenges and joys of raising Luisa and Miguel alone, the daily victories and setbacks that shaped their family dynamic. Neither acknowledged this shift explicitly. It was too subtle, too potentially complicated to name. But others noticed the lingering conversations in his office, the easy communication that required fewer and fewer words, the way Ricardo sometimes actually smiled when Camilla entered a room. The speculation remained muted, respectful of Ricardo's position and Camilla's professionalism, but it existed nonetheless, whispers about the nature of their relationship, questions about its influence on business decisions. Camilla was acutely aware of these undercurrents. As a woman who had risen rapidly from cleaning staff to executive leadership, she understood that her motives and methods would be scrutinized more closely than those of her male counterparts. Any hint of impropriety, any suggestion that her advancement might be based on personal rather than professional factors, could undermine everything she had worked to achieve. Ricardo seemed oblivious to such concerns, or perhaps simply indifferent to others' opinions. His focus remained steadfastly on the company's performance, which had strengthened considerably under their joint leadership. The turning point came, unexpectedly, during a business trip to London for meetings with European investors. A delayed flight had left them stranded at Heathrow overnight, leading to an impromptu dinner at the airport hotel, the first time they had shared a meal without the pretext of discussing work. "Tell me about Sophia," Camilla said as they waited for their food, venturing into personal territory that usually remained off-limits. "What is she studying?" Ricardo looked momentarily surprised by the question, then his expression softened. "Art history and business, an unusual combination that somehow makes perfect sense for her. She's always had her mother's eye for beauty and my head for numbers. You must be proud of her." "I am." He rotated his wine glass slowly, watching the liquid catch the light. "Though I haven't always been the father she deserved. After Isabella died, I retreated into work. It was easier than facing the empty house, the questions I couldn't answer, the void that couldn't be filled." The admission, so personal, so unlike his usual measured statements, hung in the air between them. "Sophia was 13, he continued, after a moment. "Old enough to understand death, but not old enough to process it without guidance. Guidance I wasn't equipped to provide." "You were grieving too," Camilla offered gently. "Yes, but I was the adult. I should have done better." His gaze met hers, unexpectedly vulnerable. "She's 25 now, building her own life. We speak regularly, but there's a distance that I created and don't know how to bridge." Camilla thought of her own children, of the bond they shared despite, or perhaps because of, the hardships they had endured together. It's never too late to try. Children are remarkably forgiving when they sense genuine effort. Perhaps. Ricardo seemed skeptical but thoughtful. "And what about Miguel and Luisa's father? Do they see him?" The question caught Camilla off guard. She had rarely spoken of João to anyone at Alves. The pain of his abandonment, something she preferred to keep separate from her professional life. "No," she said finally. "He left when Miguel was 2. Addiction, it changes people. The man who walked out wasn't the same one I had married." Ricardo nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "And you've managed alone since then?" "Not entirely alone. There have been people who helped along the way. Mrs. Pereira, our neighbor, a teacher who recognized Luisa's potential and provided extra materials when we couldn't afford them." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "You." The acknowledgement of the personal dimension of his assistance, so long unspoken between them, shifted, the atmosphere subtly but significantly. "I merely opened a door," Ricardo said, his tone deliberately neutral. "You walked through it on your own merit. Nevertheless, it changed everything for us. My children have opportunities now that I could never have provided otherwise." Their food arrived, creating a natural break in the conversation. As they ate, discussing lighter topics, a recent film Camilla had taken the children to see, a book Ricardo had been reading, something had changed between them. A boundary had been crossed, revealing not just the professional allies they had become, but the complex individuals behind those roles. Later, as they said goodnight in the hotel corridor, Ricardo hesitated before turning toward his room. "Camilla," he began, uncharacteristically uncertain, "I want you to know that I value our partnership more than I've acknowledged." Before she could respond, he continued, his words carefully measured. "But I'm also aware of the complexities it creates for both of us, professionally and otherwise." The unspoken question hung between them, an acknowledgement of the subtle shift in their relationship, and a query about its meaning, its direction. Camilla took a breath, weighing her response with the same care she applied to crucial business decisions. "I value it too, and yes, there are complexities, but I think we're both capable of navigating them with integrity. It was neither an advance nor a retreat, simply an honest assessment of where they stood. Ricardo studied her face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with the balance she had struck. "Good night, then. Our meeting with Harrington is at 9. "Good night, Ricardo." As she entered her room, Camilla realized it was the first time she had used his first name, a small but significant marker of the evolving nature of their connection. What neither of them could have anticipated was how soon that connection would be tested, or how the personal trust they had begun to build would become crucial to navigating the challenges that lay ahead. The São Paulo skyline glittered beyond, the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive conference room, the city transitioning from day to evening as the board meeting stretched into its 4th hour. The atmosphere was tense, charged with competing visions for Alves Incorporated's future and the power dynamics that inevitably accompanied such discussions. Camilla sat to Ricardo's right, reviewing the proposal for international expansion that had dominated the afternoon's debate. The plan was ambitious, establishing new headquarters in Singapore to capitalize on Asian markets while simultaneously strengthening their European presence through strategic acquisitions. "The timing is aggressive," Carlos insisted, directing his comments to Ricardo while pointedly ignoring Camilla. "Markets are volatile. We should delay at least 2 quarters. "Delay is effectively surrender," Ricardo countered. "Our competitors won't wait, and neither will the opportunities." Around the table, board members exchanged glances, their loyalties divided between Ricardo's vision and Carlos's caution. As chief financial officer, Carlos wielded significant influence, particularly with the more conservative members who prioritized stability over growth. "What's your assessment, Camilla?" Ricardo asked suddenly, bringing her directly into the conflict in a way he rarely did during board meetings. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others skeptical. Carlos's expression hardened, his displeasure at her inclusion evident. "The financial risks are real," Camilla acknowledged, meeting Carlos's gaze briefly before addressing the entire board. "But so is the cost of inaction. I've analyzed the projections from 3 independent sources, and all indicate the same trend. This market window won't remain open indefinitely." She turned to the digital display, bringing up a series of charts she had prepared. "Here's what we're looking at if we move forward now versus waiting 6 months. The difference in potential return is substantial." For the next 10 minutes, she presented data that balanced Carlos's valid concerns against the strategic advantages of immediate action, concluding with a compromise that preserved the essential elements of Ricardo's vision while incorporating additional safeguards. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Maria from legal nodded approvingly. "That addresses my concerns about regulatory compliance in the transition phase." One by one, other board members indicated their support for the modified approach. Even Carlos, though clearly reluctant, conceded that the revised timeline mitigated some of the more extreme risks. Ricardo remained silent throughout this exchange, watching as Camilla navigated the competing interests with a deftness that reflected her growing confidence in executive leadership. When the final vote came, unanimous approval of the amended proposal, his brief nod to her conveyed more than public words could have. As the meeting concluded and board members gathered their materials, conversation shifted to lighter topics. Upcoming holidays, a charity gala several of them would attend, the recent success of a local football team. "Will you be bringing anyone to the foundation dinner next week, Ricardo?" one of the senior board members asked casually. "It's been a while since we've seen you with a companion at these events." The question, though innocuous on the surface, carried subtle implications that Camilla immediately recognized. The glance several board members exchanged, the slight shift in Ricardo's posture, these were the undercurrents of speculation about their relationship that had been growing despite their professional discretion. "I'll be attending alone as usual," Ricardo replied, his tone discouraging further discussion. "My focus will be on the donors, not socializing." The moment passed quickly, but it left an uncomfortable residue that lingered as Camilla returned to her office after the meeting. The foundation dinner was a major annual event that raised funds for educational initiatives, a cause Ricardo supported personally as well as through corporate channels. As Chief of Staff, Camilla would normally attend such functions, but now she wondered if her presence would fuel unwanted speculation. She was still contemplating this when Ricardo appeared in her doorway an hour later, after the building had quieted and most employees had departed. "You handled the board well today," he said, entering and taking a seat across from her desk, an inversion of their usual meeting configuration that felt deliberately equalizing. "Thank you. I think the compromise satisfied everyone's primary concerns." "Indeed," he paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "About the foundation dinner. I can make myself unavailable if that would be easier," Camilla offered, addressing the unspoken issue directly. "Given the perceptions that seem to be developing." Ricardo's expression darkened slightly. "Is that what you want? To avoid public appearances together because of office gossip?" The question caught her off guard with its bluntness. "No, but I thought you might prefer to avoid complications." "Your reputation—" "My reputation," he interrupted, "is built on decisions I make based on what I believe is right, not on what others might speculate about." He leaned forward, his gaze direct. "And the right decision is for my Chief of Staff to be present at a major corporate event, regardless of what anyone might whisper." The firmness of his position was simultaneously reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it affirmed her professional value, concerning because it seemed to dismiss legitimate considerations about how such appearances might be interpreted. "I appreciate that," Camilla said carefully. "But we should acknowledge that our working relationship has evolved. People notice these things, especially when they involve dramatic shifts in hierarchy." Ricardo was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You mean they wonder how a cleaning woman became an executive so quickly, and what that might imply about her relationship with the CEO?" The blunt articulation of what had remained largely unspoken between them hung in the air. Camilla didn't flinch from it. "Yes, and those questions could undermine both of our positions if we ignore them." She expected defensiveness or dismissal, Ricardo's typical response to situations he considered beneath his concern. Instead, he surprised her with a thoughtful nod. "You're right, of course. Perception matters in leadership, however unfair or inaccurate it might be." He seemed to come to a decision. "Which is why I'd like to make a formal announcement at the dinner, highlighting your role in the Singapore expansion and publicly acknowledging your contributions to the company's recent successes." The proposal was unexpected and, Camilla realized, quite strategic. By focusing explicit attention on her professional accomplishments in a highly visible setting, Ricardo would redirect speculation from the personal to the professional, creating a narrative about merit rather than favoritism. That could be effective, she agreed, though it might seem defensive if not handled carefully. "Then we'll ensure it's handled carefully." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "After all, managing perceptions is part of what you do exceptionally well." The compliment, delivered with rare warmth, eased the tension that had built between them. This was familiar terrain, problem-solving, strategic planning, navigating complex situations with multiple stakeholders. The personal undercurrents remained, but they had found a way to address them within the framework of their professional partnership. As Ricardo left her office, however, Camilla found herself wondering about the boundaries of that partnership, how firm they were, how permeable, how susceptible to the human connections that inevitably formed when people worked closely together under pressure. The foundation dinner, held at one of São Paulo's most elegant venues, was a showcase of corporate philanthropy and social networking. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities, and wealthy donors mingled over champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Their conversations a careful dance of influence and alliance building, disguised as casual socializing. Camilla arrived separately from Ricardo, wearing a navy blue gown that managed to be both elegant and understated, a balance she had carefully considered. As Chief of Staff, she needed to project authority and professionalism, but as a woman, at a social event, she was conscious of avoiding anything that might be interpreted as an attempt to attract attention, particularly Ricardo's. She spent the first hour circulating among guests, many of whom she knew from previous corporate functions. The reception was mixed. Some greeted her warmly, interested in her perspective on market trends or corporate developments. Others were coolly polite, their assessment of her position at Alves clearly skeptical. Carlos was present with his wife, a stylish woman who evaluated Camilla with a single comprehensive glance, before engaging her in conversation about the educational programs the foundation supported. The interaction was cordial, but laden with unspoken assessment, as if Camilla were being measured against some standard known only to those born into privilege. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Ricardo finally approached her, having spent most of the evening with major donors and board members. "Everything going smoothly?" he asked, his public demeanor as controlled as always. "Yes, the donation pledges are exceeding projections. Maria has been tracking them." Camilla maintained a professional distance, conscious of the eyes that occasionally flicked in their direction. Ricardo nodded, seemingly about to move on to another group when Carlos appeared beside them, his wife still at his side. "Ricardo, I wanted to introduce you to Pierre Dumas. He's just flown in from Paris and has some interesting perspectives on the European market." Carlos gestured toward a distinguished man waiting nearby. "I know you've been seeking fresh insights on that front." It was a transparent attempt to separate Ricardo from Camilla, framed as a business opportunity that couldn't be declined. Ricardo's slight frown indicated he recognized the maneuver, but was constrained by social protocol from refusing. "Of course," he agreed, then turned to Camilla. "Join us. Dumas' analysis could be relevant to our discussion from yesterday." The inclusion was deliberate, a public alignment that countered Carlos's attempt at isolation. As they moved toward the waiting businessman, Carlos's wife touched Camilla's arm lightly, holding her back. "That's a lovely dress," she commented, her tone pleasant but her eyes calculating. "Simple but effective, like your approach to business, from what Carlos tells me." The comment could be interpreted as either complimentary or subtly condescending. Camilla chose to take it at face value. "Thank you. I believe in effectiveness, both in fashion and business." "Indeed." The woman's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you've certainly been effective at Alves. Such a remarkable rise, especially for someone with your background." The implication was clear, that Camilla's advancement must have involved factors beyond professional merit. Before she could respond, Ricardo's voice cut through the tension. "Ms. Oliveira's background is precisely what makes her invaluable to Alves," he stated, having apparently overheard the exchange. "She brings perspectives and insights that those of us with more conventional careers often miss." His emphasis carried a subtle rebuke, one that wasn't lost on Carlos's wife, whose smile tightened noticeably. "How forward-thinking of you," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Carlos always says you have an eye for unconventional talent." The exchange, brief as it was, epitomized the complex social waters Camilla now navigated, waters where words carried multiple meanings and alliances shifted beneath seemingly casual conversations. When dinner was announced, table assignments created another potential minefield. As Chief of Staff, Camilla was seated at Ricardo's table, along with several board members and major donors. The arrangement was professionally appropriate, but socially loaded, especially when Ricardo held her chair, a common courtesy that nevertheless drew speculative glances. Throughout the meal, Camilla focused on facilitation rather than prominence, ensuring conversations flowed smoothly, highlighting others' contributions, demonstrating her value through competence rather than assertion. It was a strategy she had developed over months of similar functions, one that served both to advance corporate objectives and to diffuse potential resentment. After dinner came Ricardo's address to the assembled guests, a brief speech about the Foundation's achievements and future goals. As promised, he included a specific acknowledgement of Camilla's role in recent corporate successes, framing it within a broader discussion of talent development and diverse perspectives. "Leadership comes in many forms," he concluded, his gaze moving across the audience. "At Alves, we recognize that sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources. Camila Oliveira embodies this principle, bringing intelligence, integrity, and innovative thinking to challenges that traditional approaches have failed to solve. The recognition was public, specific, and framed in purely professional terms, exactly as they had discussed. Yet something in Ricardo's delivery, in the warmth of his tone when he spoke her name, conveyed more than just corporate appreciation. As applause followed his speech, Camilla caught Carlos watching her with narrowed eyes, his assessment calculating rather than congratulatory. She met his gaze steadily, neither challenging nor retreating, simply acknowledging his observation with professional composure. The evening continued with dancing and further socializing, but the dynamic had shifted subtly following Ricardo's speech. Some who had been distant earlier now approached Camilla with increased interest, while others watched from a distance, recalibrating their assessment of her position within the corporate hierarchy. It was past midnight when Camilla finally prepared to leave, having fulfilled her professional obligations and navigated the social complexities with careful precision. As she waited for her car, Ricardo joined her in the quiet foyer, both of them momentarily separated from the ongoing festivities. "Thank you for your words tonight," she said, keeping her tone measured despite their relative privacy. They were perfectly calibrated. They were also true. Ricardo studied her face in the softened lighting of the entrance hall. "You know that, don't you? That your value to the company isn't just a narrative I've constructed for public consumption?" The question held a vulnerability she rarely glimpsed in him, a need for reassurance that he had been understood correctly, that his professional appreciation wasn't being mistaken for something tactical or insincere. "I know," she affirmed, allowing a moment of genuine connection despite their public setting. "Just as I hope you know that my commitment to Alves and to our partnership is based on more than gratitude for the opportunity you provided." Something shifted in Ricardo's expression, a softening that transcended professional boundaries without explicitly acknowledging the personal territory it approached. "I do know that," he said quietly. "It's why I trust you more than anyone else in the company, perhaps more than anyone in my life right now." The admission, so unexpected and unguarded, created a moment of suspended time between them, a space where titles and hierarchies and corporate politics briefly fell away, leaving only two people acknowledging a connection that had grown beyond its original parameters. Camilla's car arrived before she could formulate a response, breaking the moment with practical necessity. As she prepared to depart, Ricardo touched her arm lightly. "My daughter is visiting next weekend," he said, the apparent non sequitur surprising her. "I'd like her to meet you, if you're available." The invitation represented another boundary crossed, a deliberate introduction to the most personal aspect of Ricardo's life, one he kept carefully separated from his corporate existence. "I'd like that," Camilla replied simply, understanding the significance without need for elaboration. As her car pulled away, she found herself contemplating the evening's developments, the public acknowledgement, the private connection, the implicit recognition that whatever was evolving between them had become too significant to be contained within purely professional parameters. What neither of them could have anticipated was how this gradual shift would accelerate in the coming weeks, catalyzed by events beyond their control and choices that would test not just their professional alliance, but the deeper bonds that had begun to form beneath it. Sofia Alves descended the escalator at Guarulhos International Airport with the confident grace of someone accustomed to navigating global hubs alone. At 25, she carried herself with a poised self-assurance that reminded Camilla of Ricardo, though Sofia's features, delicate and expressive, must have come from her mother. Camilla stood slightly behind Ricardo in the arrivals area, feeling unexpectedly nervous about this meeting. She had learned more about Sofia over the past week, that she was completing her master's degree in London, that she visited Brazil rarely, that her relationship with her father was complicated by years of emotional distance following her mother's death. When Sofia spotted Ricardo, her expression transformed, a genuine smile breaking through her composed exterior. Their embrace was brief but heartfelt, suggesting a connection that remained strong despite the complications Ricardo had described. "Papa," Sofia said, stepping back to examine him critically, You look tired. Are you working too much again? No more than usual, Ricardo replied with a rare smile. Sophia, I'd like you to meet Camila Oliveira, my chief of staff, Sophia finished, turning her assessing gaze to Camilla. I've read about you. The financial papers call you Alves's secret weapon. Camilla extended her hand, surprised by the reference. I wasn't aware I'd attracted the attention of financial journalists. After the Singapore expansion? Definitely. Sophia's handshake was firm, her manner direct but not unfriendly. Plus, there's natural interest in someone who rises from cleaning, staff to executive leadership in under 2 years. It's not exactly a common career trajectory. The blunt acknowledgement of Camilla's background, delivered without judgment or insinuation, was refreshingly straightforward after months of navigating carefully around the subject in corporate circles. Sophia prefers direct communication, Ricardo explained, a hint of pride in his voice. A quality that serves her well in academic debates but occasionally startles those used to corporate diplomacy. Sophia laughed, linking her arm through her father's as they walked toward the exit. What Papa means is that I don't pretend things aren't obvious when they are. Like the fact that he must value you enormously to have created a position specifically for you. The observation was accurate but potentially loaded. Camilla responded carefully, Your father values results and loyalty. I've worked hard to deliver both. I'm sure you have, Sophia agreed easily. From what I've read, the operational efficiencies you've implemented have increased profitability by nearly 8%. That's impressive by any standard. The conversation continued in this vein as they drove from the airport to Ricardo's home, a modernist mansion in one of São Paulo's most exclusive neighborhoods. Sophia asked thoughtful questions about Camilla's role, her perspective on various business trends, and her assessment of Alves's competitive position. There was genuine interest behind the queries, a curiosity about Camilla as a professional rather than merely as her father's employee. Ricardo remained largely silent during this exchange, observing the interaction with an expression Camilla couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't until they arrived at his home and Sophia excused herself to freshen up that he spoke privately to Camilla. She likes you, he said, his tone suggesting this was significant. Sophia doesn't engage this way with people unless she's genuinely interested. She's very direct, Camilla observed, refreshingly so. Like her mother in that respect. A shadow of old grief passed briefly across Ricardo's features. Isabella never had patience for corporate games or social pretense. The mention of his late wife, so rare in their conversations, felt meaningful in this context, as if Ricardo was deliberately connecting two important parts of his life that had remained largely separate until now. The day proceeded differently than Camilla had anticipated. Rather than the formal lunch she had expected, during which she would maintain professional demeanor while making polite conversation, the atmosphere was surprisingly relaxed. Sophia insisted on showing Camilla the garden her mother had designed, pointing out specific plants and explaining their significance with obvious emotional connection to these memories. Ricardo joined them, adding his own recollections about Isabella's passionate interest in native Brazilian flora and her efforts to create a sustainable garden long before it became fashionable. As they walked among carefully tended beds of vibrant plants, Camilla glimpsed a side of Ricardo she had never seen before. More animated, less guarded, his love for his late wife evident in every story he shared. She would have liked what you've done with the company, Sophia told her father as they settled on the terrace for lunch. Especially the sustainability initiatives, those were important to her. Ricardo nodded, his expression softening. Many of those were Camilla's initiatives, actually. She pushed for them when others thought they were unnecessary expenses. Sophia turned to Camilla with increased interest. Really? What made you advocate for them? The question was genuine. Without the defensive edge such inquiries often carried when coming from longtime executives who resented her influence. Camilla found herself responding more personally than she might have in a professional setting. I've seen the impact of environmental degradation firsthand, she explained. The neighborhood where I grew up flooded regularly because of poor drainage and overdevelopment. The children there still get sick from contaminated water when it rains heavily. She paused, wondering if she had shared too much, but Sophia's engaged expression encouraged her to continue. When you've experienced these problems directly, sustainability isn't an abstract concept or a marketing strategy. It's a necessity. I believe companies like Alves have a responsibility to lead by example. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. That perspective probably isn't represented in most corporate boardrooms. It wasn't in ours, Ricardo confirmed, until Camilla. The conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on Sophia's research, recent political developments in Brazil, and the art exhibition she had recently attended in London. Throughout the afternoon, Camilla found herself increasingly included in discussions that felt more like those between friends than employer and employee. As evening approached, Camilla prepared to leave, aware that father and daughter needed time. Alone together, Sophia surprised her with a warm hug. "I'm glad Papa has you in his life," she said quietly, the ambiguity of the statement hanging between them. "Both professionally and, well, you're good for him. I haven't seen him this engaged in years." Before Camilla could formulate a response that acknowledged the comment without presuming its implications, Sophia continued, "Would you and your children like to join us tomorrow? Papa mentioned they're around the same age I was when—" She hesitated. "When things were difficult for us, I'd like to meet them." The invitation, unexpected and touching, caught Camilla off guard. Including her children represented another significant boundary crossed, a movement from professional association to personal connection that couldn't be easily dismissed as merely networking or business courtesy. She glanced at Ricardo, who nodded almost imperceptibly, his expression conveying that the invitation had his support. "They would love that," Camilla said finally. "Thank you." As Ricardo walked her to her car, a comfortable silence settled between them, one filled with unspoken acknowledgments of the day's significance. At the driveway, he paused. "Thank you for coming today," he said, his voice lower than usual. "It meant a lot to Sophia, and to me." The simple statement carried emotional weight beyond its words, an admission of personal value that transcended their professional relationship. "I enjoyed meeting her," Camilla replied honestly. "She's remarkable. You should be proud." "I am." Ricardo's gaze held hers steadily. "Just as you should be proud of Luisa and Miguel. I look forward to meeting them tomorrow." As Camilla drove away, she found herself contemplating the shifting landscape between them, the gradual but unmistakable evolution from professional allies to something more complex, more personal. Sophia's direct acknowledgement had brought into the open what had remained largely unspoken, creating a new context for their relationship that would require careful navigation. What she couldn't have anticipated was how completely the following day would transform that relationship, accelerating changes that might otherwise have unfolded over months or years into a single, pivotal afternoon. The gathering at Ricardo's home the next day began with the slightly awkward energy that typically accompanies children. Meeting adults they've been told are important. Luisa, now 9, maintained polite formality, while 7-year-old Miguel alternated between shy silence and bursts of unfiltered questions about the impressive house and its many technological features. Sophia, however, proved remarkably adept at connecting with both children. She showed Luisa her collection of art books, discovering their shared interest in drawing, and enthralled Miguel with stories about the robotic exhibitions she had seen in London. Within an hour, the initial stiffness had dissolved, replaced by genuine engagement. Ricardo was more reserved, his interaction with the children courteous but cautious, as if uncertain how to relate to them. Camilla watched him carefully, recognizing the same hesitation she had observed in their early professional interactions, a man accustomed to clear parameters and defined roles suddenly navigating territory without established protocols. The dynamic shifted when Sophia suggested swimming in the pool. As the children changed into the swimwear Camilla had brought just in case, Ricardo disappeared briefly, returning with inflatable pool toys that seemed incongruously playful in his hands. "These were Sophia's," he explained to Camilla's questioning look. "I kept them." The simple statement revealed a sentimental side he rarely displayed, a father who had preserved his daughter's childhood possessions despite his otherwise minimalist lifestyle. By the pool, Sophia helped Miguel with his floaties while Luisa demonstrated her recently acquired swimming skills. Ricardo watched from the shade, his expression thoughtful as he observed the interactions. "Your children are wonderful," he said quietly to Camilla as they sat side by side. "Confident but not entitled, curious but respectful. That's your influence." The compliment, specific and genuine, touched Camilla deeply. "Thank you. I've tried to teach them that our circumstances don't define us, that respect and kindness matter more than material things." Ricardo nodded, his gaze still on the children as Sophia organized an impromptu swimming race. "That's a valuable lesson, one I perhaps didn't emphasize enough with Sophia when she was younger." "She seems to have learned it anyway," Camilla observed. "The way she connected with Luisa and Miguel, there's genuine interest there, not condescension." "Yes, that comes from Isabella." A small smile touched his lips. "My wife had a gift for seeing people as they were, not as their social position dictated." The conversation might have continued in this reflective vein had Miguel not called out suddenly, his voice urgent. "Mama! Look!" Camilla turned to see her son at the edge of the pool, pointing at Luisa, who was floating face down in the water, unmoving. Her heart stopped. Before she could even stand, Ricardo was moving, covering the distance to the pool in seconds, and diving in with a powerful thrust that sent water splashing over the edges. He reached Luisa in moments, turning her over and lifting her face above the surface with practiced efficiency. Camilla ran to the pool's edge, terror gripping her heart as Ricardo carried Luisa to the shallow end. Sophia had already pulled Miguel away, holding him close as he began to cry. "She's breathing," Ricardo announced, his voice steady as he carefully placed Luisa on the pool deck where Camilla knelt. "I think she hit her head on the side when she dove in. There's a small cut here." Indeed, a thin trickle of blood ran from Luisa's hairline, but even as they assessed the injury, her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to awareness. "What happened?" she asked groggily. The relief that flooded through Camilla was so intense she felt momentarily lightheaded. She gathered Luisa into her arms, holding her tightly, while Ricardo pressed a clean towel gently to the wound. "You hit your head, querida," Camilla explained, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "How do you feel? Does anything hurt?" Luisa touched her head tentatively. "It stings a little." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare everyone." Ricardo, still dripping from his sudden dive, knelt beside them. "No apologies necessary. Accidents happen, but we should have that cut looked at properly." What followed was a demonstration of efficiency and care that revealed yet another dimension of Ricardo's character. He called his personal physician, who arrived within 20 minutes to examine Luisa. The doctor confirmed it was a minor injury, requiring only cleaning and a small butterfly bandage, but Ricardo insisted on a full neurological check to rule out concussion. Throughout the examination, he remained close, his concern evident despite his outwardly calm demeanor. He spoke to Luisa directly, explaining each step of the assessment in terms she could understand, treating her with the same respect he would show an adult. "You were very brave," he told her when the doctor had finished and declared her fine to rest at home. "And a very good swimmer. That was an impressive dive before the accident." Luisa beamed at the compliment, the frightening experience already transforming into an adventure in her resilient young mind. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Alves." Something shifted in Ricardo's expression, a softening, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked, but not before Camilla had glimpsed it. "Ricardo," he corrected gently. "And you're very welcome, Luisa." As they prepared to leave, Luisa, now recovered enough to walk on her own but still moving carefully, Ricardo pulled Camilla aside. "Please let me send you home in my car," he said, his tone making it more request than instruction. "And I'd like to check on her tomorrow, if that's all right." The concern was genuine, transcending any professional considerations. Camilla nodded, touched by his involvement. "Of course. Thank you for everything." The wordless moment that passed between them acknowledged what neither put into speech. that his swift action had potentially averted tragedy, that the bond formed in those frightening moments had altered something fundamental between them. Sophia approached, Miguel's hand in hers. "I've promised this young man we'll finish our swimming race another day," she said, her attempt at lightness not quite masking her own lingering concern. "Perhaps next weekend." The casual suggestion of continued contact, of future gatherings beyond this initial meeting, carried implications that Camilla recognized immediately. This wasn't merely social courtesy, but a deliberate extension of connection, one that Sophia, with her characteristic directness, was making explicit. Camilla glanced at Ricardo, whose expression conveyed both surprise at his daughter's initiative and quiet approval of its intent. "We would like that," Camilla replied, including both Alves in her response. The car ride home was quiet, Luisa dozing against her shoulder, while Miguel whispered questions about whether his sister would be okay, whether they would really go swimming again at the big house. Camilla answered reassuringly, but her mind was occupied with replaying the day's events, not just the frightening accident, but the moments before and after. Ricardo's immediate action, his genuine concern, the unguarded emotions that had briefly surfaced through his usual controlled exterior. What did it mean for their relationship, both professional and personal? How would this shared experience affect their carefully maintained boundaries? And what of Sophia's obvious approval, her deliberate inclusion of Camilla and her children in future plans? These questions remained unanswered as she settled the children at home, tending to Luisa with extra attention and reassuring Miguel that his sister would be fine. It wasn't until late evening, with both children finally asleep, that Camilla had a moment to process her own feelings about the day's events. The ringing of her phone interrupted these reflections. Ricardo's name appeared on the screen, surprising her. He rarely called in the evening unless there was a work emergency. "How is she?" he asked without preamble when she answered. "Sleeping now. The doctor was right. She's fine, just a bit shaken and with a headache." Camilla moved to the small balcony of her apartment, speaking softly to avoid waking the children. "Thank you again for acting so quickly. If you hadn't been there—" "But I was," he interrupted gently. "And she's all right. That's what matters." A pause stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. "Sophia liked them very much," Ricardo continued finally. "She mentioned that Miguel reminds her of me at that age, curious about everything, always asking why." The comparison between his son and Miguel carried weight beyond the simple observation, an implicit connection, a drawing of parallels between their families. "He's been talking about her since we got home," Camilla replied, "about the robots she described and how she promised to send pictures from the exhibition." Another pause, comfortable rather than awkward. "Camilla," Ricardo's voice had softened, taking on a quality she had rarely heard before. "Today made me realize something I've perhaps known for some time, but haven't acknowledged." Her heart quickened, sensing the significance of what might follow. "What's that?" she asked when he didn't immediately continue. "That what exists between us has become more than a professional partnership, more than friendship even." The words were careful, measured, as if he was navigating unfamiliar territory. "And I find myself unwilling to pretend otherwise any longer." The directness of the statement, so unlike Ricardo's usual approach to personal matters, left Camilla momentarily speechless. When she finally responded, she matched his honesty with her own. "I've felt it too for some time now." She took a breath, weighing her next words carefully. "But there are complications, professional ones, personal ones." "Yes." His acknowledgement was straightforward. "Your career trajectory at Alves could be questioned. My judgment regarding business decisions involving you could be scrutinized." There would be talk, speculation. "And beyond the professional concerns," Camilla added, "there are the children to consider, my priorities, my responsibilities to them." "Of course," Ricardo's tone conveyed understanding rather than dismissal. "I would never ask you to compromise those responsibilities. They're part of who you are, part of what I've come to admire so deeply." The careful selection of the word admire, when something stronger might have been implied, wasn't lost on Camilla. Even in this most personal of conversations, Ricardo remained thoughtful, deliberate in his choice of language. "Perhaps," he suggested after another contemplative silence, "we could begin by acknowledging what exists between us privately, while determining together how to address the various considerations you've rightly raised." It was a characteristically Ricardo approach, rational, measured, focused on problem-solving rather than emotional declarations. Yet Camilla sensed the depth of feeling beneath the controlled exterior, the significance of this step for a man who had kept his emotional life carefully guarded for so many years. "I think that's wise," she agreed. "A beginning." "A beginning," he echoed, the phrase carrying promise rather than limitation. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Just the two of us, away from the office, away from the roles we usually occupy," she finished when he hesitated. "Exactly." "Yes," Camilla said simply. "I would like that." After they said goodnight, Camilla remained on the balcony, contemplating the conversation and its implications. There was excitement, certainly, but also a clear-eyed recognition of the challenges ahead. Their worlds were different in many ways, shaped by disparate experiences, expectations, social realities. Navigating a personal relationship while maintaining professional integrity would require careful thought, honest communication, and perhaps most importantly, mutual respect for the boundaries each would need. Yet as she finally returned inside, checking on her sleeping children before preparing for bed herself, Camilla felt a sense of possibility that transcended the potential difficulties. What had begun with a single coin given freely on a cold night had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. A connection that had transformed them both in ways that continued to unfold. Dinner, as it turned out, was not at one of São Paulo's elegant restaurants as Camilla had half expected. Instead, Ricardo's driver delivered her to his home, where she found the formal dining room transformed by candlelight and the subtle scent of fresh flowers. "I thought privacy might be valuable for this conversation," Ricardo explained as he welcomed her, his usual business attire replaced by casual slacks and a simple button-down shirt that softened his appearance considerably. "It's perfect," Camilla agreed, appreciating the thought behind the choice. In a restaurant, they would have been recognized, observed, their interaction fodder for corporate gossip. Here they could speak freely. The meal, prepared by Ricardo's household staff, who discreetly withdrew after serving, was exceptional, without being ostentatious. Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed with surprising ease, moving between topics both light and substantive. They discussed Louisa's recovery, complete, Sophia's return to London, reluctant, and the book Ricardo was currently reading, a biography of a Brazilian architect whose work he admired. It wasn't until they moved to the terrace for coffee that they directly addressed the purpose of the evening. "So," Ricardo began, setting his cup down carefully, "we've acknowledged that our feelings have evolved beyond professional boundaries. The question becomes how, or whether, to proceed, given the complexities involved." The approach was quintessentially Ricardo, direct, analytical, focused on practical considerations rather than emotional declarations. Yet Camilla sensed the deeper currents beneath the measured words, the significance this conversation held for a man who had kept his personal life carefully separate from his professional identity for so many years. "I've been thinking about those complexities," she replied, matching his forthright tone. "There are several dimensions to consider." "Tell me." "First, there's the professional concern, how a personal relationship between us might be perceived, within the company and beyond, whether it would undermine my authority or call your judgment into question." Ricardo nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Then there's the personal dimension, the differences in our backgrounds, our life experiences, our social worlds, whether those differences would create challenges we haven't anticipated." She paused, gathering her thoughts for the most significant consideration. "And finally, there's my role as a mother. My children have already experienced one major disruption in their family structure. Any change in my personal life affects them directly." Ricardo listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, seemingly weighing his response. "All valid concerns," he acknowledged finally. "And I've considered similar questions myself. May I offer my perspective?" "Please." "Professionally, yes. There would be speculation, perhaps criticism. Some might question whether your position was earned or given. Others might wonder if my business decisions were influenced by personal factors." His tone was matter-of-fact, neither minimizing nor exaggerating these realities. "But I believe those concerns could be managed through transparency, clear boundaries between personal and professional matters, and continued excellence in our respective roles." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct. "As for the differences, in our backgrounds they exist certainly, but I've come to believe they're a strength rather than a liability. You see things I miss, understand perspectives I might overlook. Your experiences have shaped a wisdom I deeply respect." The acknowledgement, so straightforward, so free of condescension, touched Camilla deeply. Here was recognition not just of her professional value, but of the life journey that had formed her perspective, her priorities, her character. "And regarding your children," Ricardo continued, his voice softening, "they would always come first. I would never expect or want otherwise. Any relationship between us would need to develop with their well-being as a central consideration." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "What I'm suggesting isn't a dramatic change, but a gradual evolution. Getting to know each other beyond our professional roles. Spending time together, sometimes with the children, sometimes just us. Moving forward step by step, evaluating as we go." It was a thoughtful proposition, one that respected the complexities, while still acknowledging the potential that existed between them. Camilla found herself deeply moved by the care with which Ricardo had considered all dimensions of their situation, particularly her responsibilities as a mother. "I would like that," she said simply. "A gradual evolution." Something relaxed in Ricardo's expression, a tension he had perhaps not even recognized he was carrying. "So would I." What followed was a conversation unlike any they had shared before, one that moved beyond work and surface-level personal details to reveal more fundamental aspects of who they were. Ricardo spoke of his early years building the company, the financial struggles and setbacks that had shaped his approach to business. He shared memories of Isabella, their meeting at university, her unwavering support during difficult times, the devastating impact of her illness and death. In turn, Camilla told him about her childhood in a favela on São Paulo's outskirts, her determination to complete her education despite limited resources, her marriage to João and its gradual disintegration as addiction transformed the man she had once loved. "The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle after he left," she admitted, sharing something she had rarely voiced even to close friends. It was explaining to the children why their father didn't come home anymore, trying to preserve their sense of being loved and wanted when one parent had walked away. Ricardo nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sophia asked similar questions after Isabella died. The difference was that her mother hadn't chosen to leave, but to a child, the absence feels the same, a void that can't be filled. The shared experience of raising children through loss, albeit in very different circumstances, created a connection that transcended their disparate backgrounds. Both understood the weight of being the only parent, the constant balance between professional responsibilities and a child's needs, the challenge of providing stability amidst profound change. As the evening drew to a close, neither seemed eager to end this new, more personal connection. They moved from the terrace to the living room, where Ricardo surprised Camilla by putting on a record, actual vinyl, played on a vintage system that had clearly been maintained with care. "Isabella's collection," he explained as the rich sounds of a Brazilian jazz quartet filled the room. Music was her passion. She insisted digital could never capture the warmth of vinyl. It was another glimpse of the man behind the CEO, one who preserved his late wife's passions while building a new life, who remembered what had mattered to her even as years passed. When Camilla finally prepared to leave, Ricardo walked her to his car, which would take her home. At the door, he hesitated, then took her hand gently. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your honesty, for being willing to explore what might be possible between us, despite the complications. And thank you," she replied, "for seeing me, truly seeing me from the very beginning. The reference to their first encounter, her act of kindness, to a stranger who turned out to be much more than he appeared, hung between them, a reminder of the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. Ricardo smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious features. Perhaps that's the foundation we've been building all along, seeing each other clearly, beyond the roles and expectations that typically define people. As the car carried her home through the quiet streets of São Paulo, Camila reflected on his words. There was truth in them, a recognition that what had developed between them was based not on superficial attraction or convenience, but on genuine understanding that had grown gradually through shared experiences, challenges overcome together, mutual respect that had deepened into something more profound. The weeks that followed brought a careful integration of their personal and professional lives, deliberate in pace, thoughtful in execution. At work, they maintained appropriate boundaries, their interaction professional, though warmed by the deeper understanding that now existed between them. Decisions continued to be made based on business considerations, discussions remained focused on corporate objectives, and meetings proceeded with the same efficiency as before. But beyond the office, a new pattern emerged. Weekend outings with the children became regular occurrences. Visits to museums, picnics in the botanical gardens, afternoons at Ricardo's home where Luisa and Miguel gradually became comfortable in the spacious rooms that had once intimidated them. Sofia, during her video calls with her father, often asked to speak with the children as well, a connection that seemed to delight all involved. There were quieter moments too. Dinners after the children were asleep, with Mrs. Pereira watching over them. Conversations that stretched late into the evening, exploring topics both profound and mundane, shared silences that no longer felt awkward but comfortable, a space where neither needed to perform or project a particular image. Camila observed subtle changes in Ricardo during this time, a softening of his habitual reserve, a willingness to express thoughts and feelings he might previously have kept private, moments of unexpected playfulness, particularly with Miguel, whose endless questions seemed to amuse rather than annoy him. She noted changes in herself as well, a growing confidence in navigating social situations that would once have intimidated her, an ease with expressing her needs and boundaries, a deepening trust that allowed vulnerability without fear of judgment. The children too underwent transformation. Luisa blossoming under Ricardo's genuine interest in her academic abilities, Miguel finding in him a patient listener for his elaborate stories and imaginative scenarios. What had begun as cautious politeness evolved into genuine attachment, evidenced by Miguel's disappointed awe when told Ricardo couldn't join them for a particular outing, or Luisa's proud presentation of her school achievements for his approval. Not everything was smooth, of course. There were adjustments, misunderstandings, moments of uncertainty about expectations or boundaries. Ricardo occasionally retreated into work-focused distance when personal matters became emotionally charged. Camila sometimes questioned whether the worlds they came from were simply too different to truly merge. The children had periods of testing behavior, particularly Miguel, perhaps assessing the permanence of Ricardo's presence in their lives. Each challenge was addressed with the same thoughtful communication that characterized their professional partnership: direct discussion, honest expression of concerns, mutual problem-solving rather than blame or withdrawal. Gradually, a deeper trust developed, one based not on an absence of difficulties, but on the proven ability to navigate them together. It was during this period of careful evolution that an unexpected development accelerated their journey in ways neither had anticipated. The invitation arrived on embossed stationery, addressed to Ricardo Alves and Guest, a charity gala benefiting educational programs in São Paulo's underserved communities. As a major donor and board member of the foundation, Ricardo's attendance was expected. In previous years, he had always attended alone. "I'd like you to come with me," he told Camila as they discussed weekend plans one evening at her apartment, the children already asleep down the hall. "As my guest," the implication was clear. This would be their first public appearance as a couple, a statement to São Paulo society, and by extension, the business community that their relationship had evolved beyond professional boundaries. "Are you sure?" Camilla asked, understanding the significance of the invitation. It would make things official. There would be photographs, articles in the business press, speculation about what it means for the company. Ricardo nodded, his expression serious but determined. "I'm sure. I'm tired of compartmentalizing my life, keeping what matters most carefully separated from public view. Unless," he added, studying her face, "you're not ready for that step." Camilla considered the question carefully. Going public would indeed invite scrutiny, perhaps criticism. There would be those who questioned her qualifications, who attributed her professional success to personal connection rather than merit. Her children might hear comments, face questions from classmates whose parents moved in business circles. Yet maintaining separation between their personal and public lives had begun to feel increasingly artificial, a boundary that served little purpose beyond avoiding potential discomfort. Their relationship had developed substance and depth over these months, a true partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care. "I'm ready," she decided, "if you are." The night of the gala arrived with the nervous energy that accompanies significant transitions. Camilla had chosen her dress with care, an elegant emerald gown that projected confidence without ostentation. As Ricardo's driver picked her up, she felt a momentary flutter of anxiety about the evening, ahead and what it might mean for their future. Ricardo was waiting at the entrance to the hotel where the event was being held, his tuxedo impeccably tailored, his expression warming visibly when he saw her approach. The simple genuineness of his reaction calmed her nerves somewhat, a reminder that beneath the public personas they would project tonight was a relationship built on something real and increasingly precious. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she joined him, offering his arm. "Ready?" Camilla took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Their entrance together created exactly the ripple of attention they had anticipated. Conversations paused momentarily. Glances were exchanged. Phones discreetly captured images that would undoubtedly appear in social media and business publications by morning. Carlos was present with his wife, his expression a careful mask that didn't quite hide his surprise and calculation. Other Alves executives similarly observed their arrival with varying degrees of discretion and speculation. Ricardo navigated the initial reactions with practiced ease, guiding Camilla through introductions to foundation board members, major donors, and various São Paulo dignitaries. She matched his composure, drawing on months of experience in executive circles to engage confidently with people who might once have intimidated her. "Ricardo has spoken highly of your contributions to Alves," the foundation's president commented during one such introduction, "both operationally and in terms of corporate responsibility initiatives. The educational programs the foundation supports align perfectly with our corporate values," Camilla replied, the response both genuine and diplomatically appropriate. "Ensuring that talent can flourish regardless of socio-economic circumstances benefits everyone, communities, businesses, society as a whole." The evening proceeded smoothly, the initial curiosity about their relationship gradually giving way to the usual patterns of such events: networking, pledge announcements, speeches about the foundation's achievements and goals. Ricardo was called upon to address the gathering as a board member, his brief remarks focusing on the transformative power of educational opportunity, something he noted Camilla understood from personal experience. The acknowledgement, delivered naturally within a broader discussion of the foundation's impact, served to contextualize their relationship for those observing. This wasn't a CEO with a trophy companion, but two people whose shared values and complementary perspectives had drawn them together professionally and, now, personally. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and guests moved to the ballroom, for dancing, Ricardo led Camilla onto the floor for the first time. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on either of them, a public declaration through this traditional gesture of couples. "Holding up all right?" he asked quietly as they moved to the music, conscious of the eyes still occasionally tracking their movement. Better than expected, she admitted. Though Carlos looks like he's calculating exactly how this might affect next quarter's projections. Ricardo's soft laugh, rare enough to always delight her when it emerged, lightened the moment. Let him calculate. The results will speak for themselves, as they always have. As the evening continued, Camilla noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. What had begun as curiosity and speculation seemed to evolve into a gradual acceptance, not universal certainly, but perceptible in the more natural interactions, the decreased attention, the way conversations included rather than observed them. It was nearly midnight when they finally departed, both pleased with how the evening had unfolded. In the car, Ricardo took her hand, his expression thoughtful. "I have something to ask you," he said, an unusual hesitancy in his voice. "Something I've been considering for some time." Camilla's heart quickened, sensing the seriousness of whatever would follow. "Camilla, these past months have shown me what life can be, not just professionally successful, but personally fulfilling. You and the children have brought something into my world that I had forgotten was possible." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I'd like us to consider making this arrangement more permanent." She waited, allowing him to express precisely what he meant. "Would you and the children consider moving into my home? Not immediately, but when you feel ready." When we all feel ready. The proposal wasn't entirely unexpected. Their relationship had been moving steadily in this direction, but hearing it articulated directly still moved her deeply. This wasn't simply about their relationship as adults, but about creating a blended family, about Luisa and Miguel having a stable male presence in their lives again, about fundamental changes to all their daily realities. "I would need to talk with the children," she said carefully, "to make sure they understand and feel comfortable with such a significant change." "Of course," Ricardo agreed immediately. "This would need to work for all of us. We could start gradually, perhaps weekends first, to help them adjust to the space, the routine. And nothing needs to be decided tonight." His sensitivity to the children's needs, his willingness to proceed at a pace that prioritized their comfort, these were among the qualities that had gradually deepened Camilla's feelings for him from respect to something far more profound. "Thank you for understanding that they come first," she said softly. "It's one of the things I've come to love about you." The word, spoken for the first time between them, hung in the air, significant and irretrievable. Ricardo's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper, more vulnerable than she had ever witnessed in him. "Love," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Then, with quiet certainty, "Yes, that's what this is, isn't it? What it has become." "Yes," Camilla confirmed, the simplicity of the acknowledgement belying its profound importance. "That's what it has become." The car moved through the quiet streets of São Paulo, carrying them toward a future neither could have imagined, when a desperate cleaner had offered her last coin to a stranger on a cold night. A future that would continue to unfold, step by careful step, as they built something new together. A family formed not by conventional paths but by choice, by connection, by recognition of what truly mattered beyond social expectations or predetermined roles. What neither of them realized as they planned their gradual transition toward shared life was how soon their newfound happiness would face its greatest test, a challenge that would require all they had learned about each other, all the trust they had built, all the love that had grown between them to overcome. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by Ricardo's assistant, with the neutral efficiency that characterized all office communications. A visitor was waiting for Ricardo, one who had no appointment but insisted the matter was urgent and personal. "He says his name is João Oliveira," the assistant reported, glancing at Camilla with barely concealed curiosity. "He claims to be related to you." The name struck Camilla like a physical blow, momentarily robbing her of breath. João, the father of her children, the husband who had abandoned them 3 years earlier, was here in the lobby of Alves Incorporated. Ricardo, who had been reviewing documents at his desk, looked up sharply at her reaction. "Camilla, who is this person?" "My ex-husband," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within. The children's father. Understanding dawned in Ricardo's expression. He knew the broad outlines of that chapter in her life. The marriage that had dissolved under the weight of addiction, the abandonment that had left her alone to raise two small children, the years of struggle that had followed. "Do you want to see him?" Ricardo asked, his tone carefully neutral, giving her space to make her own decision without pressure or judgment. Camilla considered the question. 3 years of silence, of explaining to Luisa and Miguel why their father didn't call on birthdays, of answering questions that became less frequent, but no less painful as time passed. 3 years of building a life without João, of healing the wounds his departure had created, of finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. And now he appeared, unannounced, at her workplace. "Yes," she decided finally. "I'll see him. But not here, not in the office." Ricardo nodded, understanding the need for privacy. "Use my private conference room. Take as much time as you need." His support, offered without interrogation or possessive concern, steadied her. This was one of the qualities she had come to value most in their relationship: his respect for her autonomy, his trust in her judgment, even in situations that might have prompted insecurity in others. "Thank you," she said simply, gathering herself before heading to the conference room where João waited. The man who stood as she entered was simultaneously familiar and a stranger. João had always been handsome in a rough-hewn way, with the physical presence that came from years of construction work. But the man before her was thinner, his face lined with years that seemed beyond the actual time that had passed, his eyes holding a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Camilla," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion or perhaps simply disuse, "you look different." The understatement might have been comical in other circumstances. The woman he had left, exhausted from working multiple jobs, worn down by worry and financial stress, bore little resemblance to the executive who stood before him now, poised and polished in her tailored suit. "So do you," she replied, maintaining a careful distance. "Why are you here, João?" Direct questions had always been best with him. No preamble, no circling the issue. João ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through her, not of longing but of the strange grief that comes from recognizing how completely one can know someone who becomes a stranger. "I've been sober for 18 months, he began, the statement carrying the cadence of something often repeated in recovery meetings. "Part of the process is making amends to those I've harmed. You and the children, you're at the top of that list." Camilla absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally she acknowledged both the achievement of his sobriety and the courage it must have taken to seek her out after so long. "Congratulations on your sobriety," she said, "genuine but measured. That's a significant accomplishment." "I don't expect forgiveness," João continued, his gaze direct now. "What I did, leaving you alone with the children, disappearing when you needed me most, it's not something that can be undone with words or even with changed behavior." His self-awareness surprised her. The João she had known had been quick to justify, to blame circumstances or others for his choices. This man seemed to have developed a capacity for honest self-reflection that had been absent before. "Why now?" she asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind since hearing of his presence. "It's been 3 years, João." He nodded, accepting the implied criticism without defense. "The first year after I left, I was still using. The second, I was in a rehabilitation program in Minas Gerais, with limited outside contact. This past year, I've been working on rebuilding some foundation for my life. A job, a place to live, some stability." The explanation was reasonable, absent the excuses she might have expected. Still, 3 years was a lifetime in a child's development. Luisa had been 4 when he left, Miguel barely 2. Their memories of him would be fragments at best, impressions rather than clear recollections. "And now you want to see the children," she stated. Not a question, but a logical conclusion based on his presence. João hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "I want to ask if seeing me would be good for them. I'm not here to disrupt their lives or to assert rights I forfeited when I walked away. I'm here to offer whatever might help them, whether that's my presence, financial support, or continued absence if that's what's best." The response was unexpected in its humility, its focus on the children's needs rather than his own desires. It suggested a level of growth and maturity that the João she had married had never demonstrated. Camilla studied him, trying to reconcile the man before her with both the husband she had once loved and the father who had abandoned his responsibilities. Neither image quite matched the person now waiting patiently for her response. "They're doing well," she said finally, offering information without yet making a decision about his request. "Luisa is in 3rd grade now. She's at the top of her class in mathematics and science. Miguel started school this year. He's still figuring out how to sit still for more than 10 minutes at a time, but his teacher says he's exceptionally creative." Something flickered in João's expression, pride mingled with regret for the milestones he had missed. "They sound wonderful. You've done an amazing job with them." "It hasn't been easy," Camilla acknowledged, allowing some of the struggle of those early years to surface in her voice. "But yes, they are wonderful children." A silence stretched between them, filled with all that remained unsaid. The lonely nights, the children's tears, the birthdays and holidays, spent explaining an absence that had no adequate explanation. João seemed to understand the weight of this silence, making no attempt to fill it with excuses or apologies that would be insufficient. "I have a steady job now," he offered finally, "as a foreman with a construction company in Guarulhos. I've been there for 10 months. I have an apartment, it's small but decent. I've been setting aside money each month for the children, even though I didn't know how to get it to you." The information was clearly meant to demonstrate his stability, his readiness to provide some support after years of absence. Camilla nodded, acknowledging this without immediately responding to the implicit question about financial contribution. "And there's something else you should know," she said, deciding that complete honesty was necessary. "My life has changed significantly since you left. I'm in a serious relationship now. The children have formed a bond with my partner. We're considering making our arrangement more permanent." João's expression registered surprise, but not anger or resentment. "I'm glad," he said after a moment, the words seeming genuine. "You deserve happiness, Camila. So do Luisa and Miguel." The lack of possessiveness, the absence of the jealousy that might once have characterized his reaction, further confirmed the changes he had undergone. This was not the João who had left them, a man consumed by addiction and unable to face his responsibilities. This was someone different, someone who had confronted his failures and was attempting, however belatedly, to address them. "I need time to think about this," Camilla said, making no immediate decision about his request to see the children. "And I need to consider what's best for Luisa and Miguel. Their emotional well-being has to be my priority." João nodded, accepting this without protest. "Of course, take whatever time you need. I've left my contact information with the receptionist. If you decide they might benefit from seeing me, I'll be available." The lack of pressure, the deference to her judgment as their mother, further demonstrated the changes in him. As they prepared to conclude this unexpected meeting, João paused, seeming to struggle with something more he wanted to say. "There's one other thing," he began hesitantly. "I've seen the articles about you and Ricardo Alves, about your position here, about your relationship." Camilla tensed slightly, uncertain where this might lead. Recent business publications had indeed covered both her professional rise and, more recently, her personal connection to Ricardo, some with approval, others with thinly veiled skepticism, about her qualifications and the nature of their relationship. "I want you to know," João continued, his gaze direct, "that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You always had potential that went unrecognized, intelligence, determination, a capacity for leadership that I probably didn't appreciate enough when we were together." The acknowledgement, so unexpected, so far from the resentment or envy she might have anticipated, rendered Camilla momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she managed finally. "That means something coming from you." As João prepared to leave, he hesitated once more. "Whatever you decide about the children, I want you to know I'm sorry, not just for leaving, but for failing to see who you really were what you were capable of becoming. That was my loss, and it's one I'll always regret." With those words, he departed, leaving Camilla with emotions too complex to immediately process. She remained in the conference room for several minutes, collecting herself before returning to her office where Ricardo waited, his concern evident though he asked no immediate questions. "He's sober," she said simply. 18 months. He wants to see the children, but is leaving the decision to me." Ricardo nodded, processing this information. "And how do you feel about that possibility?" It was the right question, focused not on his own position or potential discomfort with João's reappearance, but on Camilla's assessment of what this development might mean for her family. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I need to think about whether seeing him would help the children or confuse them, whether it would provide closure or reopen wounds that have begun to heal. You don't have to decide immediately," Ricardo reminded her gently. "Take whatever time you need, and whatever you decide, I'll support you." The simple statement carried profound meaning, an acknowledgement that this decision was hers to make as the children's mother, a promise that his role in their lives would not be threatened by João's reappearance, a commitment to stand beside her regardless of the path she chose. That evening, after the children were asleep, Camilla and Ricardo sat on the balcony of her apartment, discussing the implications of João's return more fully. The conversation was thoughtful, measured, a careful examination of the potential benefits and risks of reintroducing the children's father into their lives. "They ask about him less frequently now," Camilla explained, "but the questions still come occasionally, especially from Miguel. He barely remembers João. He was so young when his father left. But he wonders, in the way children do, about missing pieces of their story." Ricardo listened attentively, offering observations without attempting to influence her decision. "Children are remarkably resilient," he noted, "and having a relationship with their biological father wouldn't necessarily diminish the connection they've formed with me, if that's a concern." His ability to set aside potential jealousy or territorial feelings in favor of what might benefit the children reinforced what Camilla already knew, that his commitment to her family transcended conventional expectations or ego. "I think," she said finally, "that a carefully managed reintroduction might be the right approach, not immediately diving into regular visitation, but perhaps a supervised meeting to see how they respond, how João handles it, whether there's a foundation to build on." Ricardo nodded, supporting her reasoning. "That seems wise, and I'm happy to be present or absent for that meeting, whatever you think would be best." The offer, to stand with her or step back according to her judgment, epitomized the partnership they had built, one based on mutual respect and trust rather than predetermined roles or expectations. As they continued to discuss various approaches, Camilla found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point, from a chance encounter on a cold night to a relationship that now faced its first significant test. João's return represented not just a complication, but an opportunity to solidify what she and Ricardo had been carefully building together, a family defined not by conventional structures, but by choice, commitment, and genuine care. The weeks that followed brought careful steps toward a new reality. Camilla spoke with Luisa and Miguel about their father's return, explaining in age-appropriate terms that João had been sick but was better now and wanted to see them. Their reactions were a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and apprehension. Complex, emotions that Camilla monitored closely, prepared to adjust plans if signs of distress emerged. The first meeting was held in a neutral location, a family-friendly restaurant with a play area that provided both structure and flexibility. Ricardo had offered to attend, but ultimately they decided his presence might complicate an already emotionally charged situation. Instead, he remained supportively in the background, available by phone if needed, but giving the biological family space to navigate this reintroduction. João arrived early, visibly nervous but prepared, bringing small, thoughtful gifts that demonstrated he had asked about the children's current interests. His interaction with them was careful, attentive, neither overwhelming them with excessive emotion nor remaining too distant. He answered their questions honestly but simply, acknowledging his absence without burdening them with details inappropriate for their ages. For Camilla, watching this interaction was a study in contrasts, between the man who had left and the one who had returned, between her children's fading memories and their present experience, between the life they had once shared and the separate paths that now intersected again with new parameters. By the end of that first meeting, a tentative foundation had been established, not a return to what was, but the beginning of something new. Joan would continue to see the children in supervised settings, gradually building a relationship based on current realities rather than past connections. He had offered financial support, which Camilla had directed toward education funds for the children rather than current expenses that she and Ricardo could comfortably manage. Ricardo's response to these developments revealed the depth of his character, his ability to welcome Joan's positive contribution to the children's lives without feeling threatened, his willingness to create space in their family structure for connections that mattered to Luisa and Miguel, his understanding that love expanded rather than diminished when shared generously. It was this quality above all others that cemented Camilla's certainty about their future together. As summer approached, the decision that had been gradually forming since Ricardo's initial suggestion became clear. It was time to create a more permanent arrangement to bring their separate households together into a shared home. The children's excitement at the prospect was tempered with practical questions: where their toys would go, whether they could still visit Mrs. Pereira, if the pool at Ricardo's house would be available whenever they wanted to swim. These concrete concerns, so characteristic of children's perspective, were easier to address than the emotional adjustments such a significant change would require. Ricardo approached the transition with characteristic thoroughness, redesigning rooms to reflect the children's personalities and preferences, ensuring the house that had once been a showcase became a genuine home. Sophia, consulted via video calls, offered enthusiastic input about creating spaces the children would love, drawing on her own memories of growing up in the house. João, informed of these plans during one of his now regular meetings with the children, responded with surprising grace. "They seem happy," he told Camilla as they watched Luisa and Miguel play. "More settled than I've ever seen them." "They are," Camilla confirmed. "Ricardo is good for them. He sees them, really sees them as individuals, and they adore him." João nodded, a flicker of wistfulness crossing his features, but no resentment. "I'm glad. They deserve that stability. We both know I couldn't provide it even now." His self-awareness, his willingness to acknowledge the limitations of what he could offer, without attempting to assert rights he had forfeited through absence, reaffirmed Camilla's decision to allow him a place in the children's lives, a presence that complemented rather than complicated the family structure she and Ricardo were building. The actual moving day arrived with organized chaos, boxes and furniture and treasured possessions transported from Camilla's apartment to Ricardo's home with the help of a professional moving company. Miguel supervised the placement of his extensive toy collection with the seriousness of a general directing troops, while Luisa arranged her books on new shelves with deliberate care, organizing them first by subject and then by author. Ricardo moved through this activity with surprising ease for someone whose home had maintained the same precise order for years. He engaged with the children's excitement, addressed practical concerns as they arose, and periodically checked in with Camilla to ensure she felt comfortable with each stage of the transition. That evening, with boxes still scattered through rooms and organization far from complete, the four of them sat down to their first dinner as a household. The moment carried emotional weight that transcended the simple act of sharing a meal. This was the formal beginning of their life as a family, a conscious choice to build something new together. Ricardo raised his glass, water for the children, wine for the adults, in a simple toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his gaze moving from Camilla to the children with equal warmth. "And to the family we're creating together." "To family," Camilla echoed, emotions making her voice slightly unsteady. Luisa, sensing the significance of the moment, raised her glass with unusual solemnity. Even Miguel, typically fidgety during meals, remained still for this brief ritual before returning to his animated description of where each of his toy dinosaurs would live in his new room. Later that night, after the children were asleep in their new beds, Camilla and Ricardo stood on the terrace looking out at the garden Isabella had created years earlier, now subtly modified to include play spaces while preserving its essential character. "Are you happy?" Ricardo asked, his arm around her shoulders, the question simple but profound. Camilla considered before answering, not because she doubted her happiness, but because she wanted to articulate what made it real and sustainable rather than merely emotional or temporary. "Yes," she said finally, "not because everything is perfect or because all challenges are resolved, but because we're building this together, deliberately, thoughtfully, with awareness of both the difficulties and the possibilities." Ricardo nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their journey had never been about fairy tale romance or easy solutions. It had been about recognizing genuine value in each other, about choosing partnership despite complications, about creating a family based on respect and care rather than convention or expectation. "I never imagined this," he admitted quietly. "After Isabella died, I thought that chapter of my life, the family chapter, was finished. That work would be enough, that Sophia would grow up and build her own life, and that would be the extent of my personal connections." Camilla turned to face him, struck by the vulnerability in this admission. "And now?" His smile, warm, genuine, without the reservation that had characterized him when they first met, was answer enough. But he put it into words as well, hands framing her face with gentle certainty. "Now I understand that life rarely follows the patterns we expect, that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from unexpected sources." His gaze held hers steadily. "That a single act of kindness on a cold night can change everything." The reference to their first meeting, the coin she had given to a stranger when it was all she had, brought the journey full circle. From that moment of simple human connection had grown something neither could have anticipated, a partnership that transcended professional collaboration, a love that defied conventional expectations, a family created through choice rather than circumstance. As they stood together in the garden Isabella had planted, and that they would now tend together, Camilla felt the weight of their shared journey. The struggles overcome, the trust gradually built, the future they were choosing to create together. Like the garden itself, it would require constant attention, adaptation to changing seasons, patience through inevitable challenges. But the foundation was solid, the commitment genuine, the love that had grown between them strong enough to weather whatever might come. Not because their path had been easy or straightforward, but precisely because it hadn't been. Because they had built their connection through conscious choice and deliberate action rather than convenient circumstance or social expectation. In that moment, standing with the man who had once been a stranger in need and was now the center of the family they were creating together, Camilla understood that their story was extraordinary, not despite its unconventional beginning, but because of it. A testament to the power of seeing beyond surfaces, of recognizing value where others might miss it, of offering kindness without expectation of return. The last coin, given freely on a cold night, had indeed changed everything, not through magical transformation, but through the very human miracle of connection that grows when genuine value is recognized and nurtured through both challenge and joy. 1 year later, Camilla stood at the edge of the garden, watching as Ricardo helped Miguel adjust his bow tie, a miniature version of the one Ricardo himself wore. Nearby, Luisa twirled in her flower girl dress, the pale blue fabric catching the afternoon light as Sophia captured the moment on her camera. The setting was transformed from its usual elegance to something even more beautiful. White chairs arranged in rows across the lawn, an arbor woven with native flowers, marking the spot where vows would soon be exchanged, paths lined with candles, waiting to be lit as evening approached. "You look stunning," Sophia said, turning her camera toward Camilla. "Absolutely perfect." The simple white dress Camilla had chosen was indeed lovely, elegant without being extravagant, formal enough for the occasion, while remaining true to her preference for understated beauty. In her hands, she held a bouquet of flowers from Isabella's garden, a meaningful touch that Ricardo had suggested and that had moved her deeply when he first mentioned it. "I'm nervous," Camilla admitted, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from the dress. "Which is ridiculous. It's just formalizing what we've already built together." Sophia smiled, lowering her camera. "Marriage is always a leap of faith, even when you've already proven you can build a life together. It's okay to be nervous. Papa is too, though he's trying not to show it." The observation made Camilla glance toward Ricardo, who was now listening with exaggerated seriousness to something Miguel was explaining, complete with elaborate hand gestures. Behind the patient attention, she could indeed detect a hint of the same anticipation she felt, the awareness that they stood at a threshold, preparing to make public and permanent the commitment they had already made in their hearts. The past year had brought its share of adjustments and challenges. Blending their lives completely had required compromise, adaptation, occasionally frustration as different habits and expectations collided. Ricardo had needed to adjust to the constant energy and occasional chaos that accompanied life with young children. Camilla had worked to find her place in a home filled with history that predated her presence. The children had tested boundaries, sometimes pushed back against new routines, occasionally used the complexity of their family structure, with both Ricardo and João now in their lives in different capacities, to attempt playing adults against each other. Yet through it all, the foundation they had built remained solid. Communication, honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care had guided them through each challenge. Ricardo's relationship with the children had deepened into something that, while different from their connection with their biological father, was equally meaningful in its own way. João had continued to be a positive, if limited, presence, respecting the boundaries established and expressing genuine appreciation for the stability and opportunities Ricardo provided. Professionally, Camilla had continued to excel as chief of staff, her position now firmly established on merit rather than perceived favoritism. Those who had once whispered about her rapid rise had been silenced by consistent results, innovative initiatives, and leadership that combined strategic vision with practical implementation. Even Carlos had grudgingly acknowledged her contributions, particularly after a major project she had championed exceeded projected returns by nearly 30%. Ricardo, too, had grown, softening some of the harder edges of his leadership style without compromising the standards that had built Alves into an industry leader. Their personal partnership had influenced his professional approach, bringing greater attention to the human dimensions of business decisions. Associates who had known him for decades commented on the change, noting that he seemed more balanced, more attuned to aspects of corporate life beyond the bottom line. The decision to marry had emerged naturally from this shared journey, not a dramatic proposal, but a mutual recognition that they wanted to formalize what had already become true in practice. The ceremony itself reflected this approach, intimate rather than ostentatious, with only close friends and family present to witness their commitment. Sophia approached, adjusting a flower in Camilla's hair with sisterly affection. "It's almost time. Are you ready?" The question carried meaning beyond the immediate moment. Was she ready not just for the ceremony, but for all it represented? The public declaration of a union that crossed social boundaries, the formal creation of a family that defied conventional definitions, the final step in a journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold night. "Yes," Camilla said, the single word encompassing her certainty about both the day and the life it celebrated. "I'm ready." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Vows exchanged under the arbor as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Luisa and Miguel stood beside them, official witnesses to the promises being made, their presence emphasizing that this union was about family, not merely couple. Sophia read a poem her mother had loved, a gesture that acknowledged Isabella's continuing place in their shared history without diminishing the present commitment. When Ricardo spoke his vows, steady, sincere, without the rehearsed quality such moments sometimes carried, Camilla saw in his eyes the journey they had traveled together. From employer and employee to partners in work and life, from strangers, divided by circumstance, to family united by choice, from isolation to connection that enriched rather than diminished their individual strengths. Her own vows acknowledged this transformation, speaking not just of love, but of recognition, of seeing and being seen, of valuing and being valued, of choosing and being chosen, for reasons that transcended conventional expectations. As rings were exchanged and the ceremonial kiss shared, applause rose from the small gathering of witnesses. Among them were faces that represented every aspect of their unlikely journey. Mrs. Pereira, who had supported Camilla through the hardest days. Maria and Paulo from Alves, who had recognized her value from the beginning. Even João, present at the children's request, and his own desire to acknowledge the family his children were now part of. The celebration that followed was joyful but intimate. Dinner at tables set throughout the garden, music that invited dancing under strings of lights that glowed more prominently as evening deepened, conversation that flowed easily among guests, from disparate backgrounds united by their connection to the newly formalized family. Ricardo found Camilla near the fountain at the garden center, taking a brief moment of quiet amid the celebration. "Happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed a year earlier on their first night in the shared home. "Beyond what I could have imagined," she replied honestly. "Not just because of today, but because of everything it represents, the life we've built, the family we've created, the partnership we continue to develop." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their happiness wasn't based on romantic fantasy or temporary emotion, but on something far more substantial. Mutual respect that had deepened into love, shared values that guided their decisions, commitment that had been tested and proven through challenges overcome together. "Sometimes," Ricardo said thoughtfully, "I think about that night. How close I came to not being on that particular street. At that particular moment. How easily our paths might never have crossed. Or how easily I might have walked past without stopping," Camilla added, acknowledging her own role in the encounter that had changed everything. "So many factors had to align for us to be here now." The observation wasn't merely sentimental, it recognized the genuine unlikelihood of their connection, the series of choices and circumstances that had brought them from such different worlds to this shared life. "And yet here we are," Ricardo said, his arm encircling her waist as they looked out at their guests, at Luisa teaching Sofia a dance move, at Miguel proudly showing his collection of interesting rocks to an indulgent Carlos, at the mingling of people who might never have connected, if not for the union they were celebrating. "Here we are," Camilla echoed, the simple phrase encompassing all they had built together. A family defined not by conventional structures but by genuine care, a partnership based on mutual respect rather than predetermined roles, a love that had grown from recognition of true value rather than superficial attraction. As they rejoined the celebration, moving among guests who represented every chapter of their journey, Camilla reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. From desperate cleaner to executive leadership, from single mother struggling to survive to partner in a thriving family, from isolation to connection that enriched rather than diminished her individual strength, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable when viewed from the outside. Yet from within, each step had unfolded naturally from the one before, not a fairy tale of magical intervention, but a human story of recognition, opportunity, effort, and choice. The coin she had given on that cold night hadn't been enchanted. It had simply revealed character that Ricardo had the wisdom to value and the generosity to nurture through opportunity. What they celebrated today wasn't miracle but possibility, the potential that exists when people see beyond surface assumptions, when kindness is offered without expectation of return, when value is recognized regardless of conventional markers, of status or success. As midnight approached and guests began to depart, Ricardo gathered the family, Camila, Luisa, Miguel, and Sofia, for a private moment away from the remaining celebration. In his hand was a small wooden box, clearly old and carefully preserved. "I wanted to share something with all of you," he said, opening the box to reveal a single coin. "This is the coin Camilla gave me the night we first met. I've kept it all this time." The children leaned forward, examining this ordinary object that had acquired extraordinary significance in their family's history. "But it's just a normal coin," Miguel observed with a child's directness. "Not even a special one." "That's exactly right," Ricardo agreed, meeting Camilla's gaze over the children's heads. "It wasn't special because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Kindness without expectation, generosity when it cost the most, seeing the humanity in a stranger when it would have been easier to look away." Luisa, more perceptive at 10 than many adults, understood the deeper meaning. "It changed everything, didn't it? That one small thing." "Yes," Camilla confirmed, the memory of that night still vivid despite the years and changes that had followed. "But not in the way stories usually tell. There was no magic, no instant transformation, just a moment of connection that created an opportunity for something more to grow." Sophia nodded, recognizing the truth in this assessment. The best stories aren't about dramatic rescues or magical solutions. They're about people recognizing value in each other, choosing to build something meaningful together despite challenges or differences. The observation was perceptive, an acknowledgement that what they had created as a family wasn't based on fairy tale romance or convenient circumstance, but on deliberate choice, mutual respect, and genuine care that had grown through shared experience. Ricardo returned the coin to its box, then offered it to Camilla. "I thought we might keep this somewhere in our home, not as a trophy or symbol of the past, but as a reminder of how simple actions can lead to unexpected journeys when they come from genuine values." The suggestion touched Camilla deeply, not because she needed reminding of their beginning, but because it acknowledged the meaning of that moment, without romanticizing or exaggerating its significance. Like everything in their relationship, it balanced the emotional and practical, the symbolic and real. As the family stood together under the garden lights, connected by choice rather than convention, Camilla reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From isolation to belonging, from struggle to security, from kindness offered to a stranger to love shared among family, each step had built upon the last, creating something none of them could have anticipated, but all now treasured beyond measure. It wasn't a story of magic coins or fairy godmothers, but of human connection at its most genuine, recognition of value beyond surface appearances, opportunity given and seized through effort, commitment tested and proven through challenges overcome together. In a world that often celebrated instant transformation or dramatic rescue, theirs was a different kind of success story, one built through consistent choice, mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to see beyond conventional expectations, to the possibilities that existed when people truly recognized each other's worth. As they walked back toward the remaining guests, arms linked in a physical manifestation of their emotional connection, Camilla knew that what they had built together would continue to grow and evolve. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments required, new chapters to navigate as the children grew and circumstances changed, but the foundation would remain solid, a partnership based on seeing and valuing each other completely, a family, created through choice rather than convention, a love that had grown from that first moment of recognition on a cold night when a desperate cleaner had offered her last coin to a stranger in need. Some might call it chance or fate or destiny. Camilla preferred to see it as possibility, the potential that exists when people move beyond assumptions to genuine connection, when kindness is offered without expectation of return, when value is recognized regardless of conventional markers of status or success. Whatever name it carried, the result was the family they had created together, unique, resilient, and built on a foundation strong enough to weather whatever the future might bring. 5 years later, Camilla stood at the edge of the garden, watching as Luisa adjusted the tassel on her graduation cap. At 15, her daughter had blossomed into a young woman of remarkable poise and intelligence, graduating at the top of her middle school class with scholarship offers from several prestigious high schools. Ricardo approached, placing a hand on Camilla's shoulder with the comfortable familiarity of years shared. "She looks just like you in that photo from your graduation," he observed. Same determined expression, same proud posture. The comparison made Camilla smile, memories of her own school days flooding back. The public school graduation ceremony held in a gymnasium with flickering lights, the single photograph her mother had been able to afford, the pride that had transcended their modest circumstances. Louisa's experience was certainly different in its external trappings. The private school with its manicured grounds, the professional photographer capturing multiple poses, the celebration planned with abundant resources rather than careful saving. Yet the core emotion, the pride in achievement, the sense of possibility that education created, remained fundamentally the same across generations. "Everything ready for the party?" Camilla asked, though she already knew the answer. Ricardo's attention to detail hadn't diminished over their years together, particularly when it came to celebrating family milestones. "Just waiting for the guests to arrive." He checked his watch. "Sophia's flight landed an hour ago. She should be here soon with her fiancé." The mention of Sophia's partner, a thoughtful architecture professor she had met during her doctoral studies in London, brought another smile to Camilla's lips. Their engagement had delighted Ricardo, not least because it meant Sophia would likely return to Brazil permanently after years abroad. "And Miguel?" she asked, not seeing their son among the family members gathering for pre-ceremony photographs. "With João," Ricardo replied easily. "They're picking up the cake together. He wanted to show his father the design he created." The casual reference to this arrangement, Miguel spending time with his biological father while helping prepare for a celebration at the home he shared with his mother and stepfather, reflected the remarkable family structure they had built over the years. João had remained a consistent if limited presence in the children's lives, his relationship with them strengthening as his sobriety endured and his own life stabilized. What might have become complicated or contentious in other circumstances had instead evolved into a cooperative approach to parenting that prioritized the children's well-being above adult ego or conventional expectations. João respected the primary family unit Camilla and Ricardo had created, while they ensured the children maintained meaningful connection with their biological father. The result was a family defined not by traditional boundaries, but by genuine care, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to nurturing Luisa and Miguel through the challenges of growing up. It wasn't always simple. There had been disagreements about approaches, occasional tension when perspectives differed, but the foundation of communication and common purpose had proven sturdy enough to weather these moments. "There they are," Ricardo said, pointing toward the driveway where João's pickup truck had just arrived, Miguel bounding out with the energy that characterized him even at 12. The cake box was carefully transferred to Ricardo's waiting hands, the three males consulting seriously about its transportation to the display table set up for the post-graduation celebration. Watching this interaction, the biological father, the stepfather, and the son moving between them with comfortable ease, Camilla felt a wave of gratitude for how fully their unconventional family had transcended potential pitfalls to create something genuinely nurturing for the children at its center. Sophia's arrival completed the gathering, her academic success and recent engagement adding to the celebratory atmosphere. As the family prepared to depart for the ceremony, cars loaded with proudly dressed relatives and carefully wrapped gifts, Camilla found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment of shared joy. The graduation itself was everything such ceremonies tend to be, simultaneously moving and tedious, filled with speeches about future promise and acknowledgement of past effort. When Luisa's name was called, the family's cheering section erupted, with enthusiasm that transcended typical decorum, their pride too genuine to be contained by formality. Later, as guests filled their home for the celebration, Camilla observed the gathering from a quiet corner of the terrace. The diversity of those present told its own story about the life they had built. Executives from Alves incorporated alongside Mrs. Pereira from their old neighborhood, Sophia's academic colleagues conversing with João's construction work friends, Luisa's classmates whose backgrounds spanned São Paulo's social spectrum, Miguel's soccer teammates devouring cake with the focused attention of growing boys. Ricardo found her there, offering a glass of champagne and a moment of shared reflection amidst the happy chaos. Thinking deep thoughts? He asked, knowing her well enough to recognize the contemplative mood beneath her social smile. Just appreciating how far we've come, she admitted. All of us in different ways. The observation encompassed multiple journeys, professional accomplishments, personal growth, family bonds that had strengthened through both celebration and challenge. From her own rise to executive leadership, at Alves to Ricardo's evolution into a more balanced leader who valued human connection alongside business success. From Luisa's academic achievements to Miguel's developing confidence. From Sophia's professional recognition to João's sustained recovery and stability. It's been quite a path, Ricardo agreed, his gaze taking in the gathering that represented their shared life. One I couldn't have imagined that night when a kind woman offered her last coin to a stranger. The reference to their beginning, now, family law known to all who shared their lives, brought a warm smile to Camilla's lips. Nor could I have imagined standing here today, surrounded by all this. Her gesture encompassed not just the physical surroundings, the beautiful home that had become truly theirs through years of shared life, but the less tangible wealth of connection, purpose, and belonging that filled it. Would you change anything? Ricardo asked, the question genuine rather than merely rhetorical. If you could go back to that moment, knowing what you know now about the journey ahead. Camilla considered this carefully, her answer thoughtful rather than automatic. The challenges were real. The adjustments weren't always easy. There were moments when cultural differences or social assumptions created hurdles we had to work to overcome. Ricardo nodded, acknowledging these truths without defensive response. It was one of the qualities that had sustained their partnership through the years, this capacity for honest assessment without taking differences personally or retreating into self-protection. But no, Camilla continued, her certainty evident in her voice. I wouldn't change our path. Every step, even the difficult ones, contributed to what we've built together, a family defined not by convention, but by choice, a partnership based on genuine respect rather than predetermined roles. Her gaze moved to where Luisa stood with a group of friends, confidence evident in her posture, to Miguel demonstrating a complicated soccer move to an admiring younger cousin, to Sophia discussing her research with genuine passion, to João conversing comfortably with guests who had once been strangers to his world. Look what grew from that moment of connection, she said softly. Not just our lives changed, but ripples extending outward, opportunities created for others, perspectives broadened. On both sides of traditional divides, proof that value exists where conventional wisdom might not recognize it. Ricardo's hand found hers, the gesture comfortable with years of shared life, yet still carrying meaning beyond casual contact. You've transformed Alves as much as it transformed your circumstances, he observed. The educational initiatives for employees' children, the promotion pathways for staff regardless of formal credentials, the emphasis on recognizing potential beyond traditional markers, these have changed hundreds of lives beyond our immediate circle. The assessment was accurate if understated. Under their joint leadership, Alves Incorporated had indeed evolved, maintaining its market leadership while developing corporate practices that recognized human potential in all its forms. The cleaning staff now had educational opportunities and promotion pathways that hadn't existed before. Executives were evaluated not just on financial performance, but on their development of talent throughout the organization. Community engagement had become central to corporate identity rather than peripheral charity. It's what I'm most proud of professionally, Camilla acknowledged. Creating systems that can identify the next Camilla Oliveira before she spends years cleaning offices when she could be leading initiatives. Though perhaps not every cleaner has your particular combination of intelligence, determination, and character, Ricardo noted, with the mixture of professional assessment and personal affection that characterized their partnership. Perhaps not, Camilla agreed, but many have potential that traditional systems fail to recognize. The point isn't to find my exact duplicate, but to create structures that see beyond conventional indicators to the human capacity that exists in unexpected places. As they rejoined the celebration, moving among guests who represented every chapter of their journey together, Camilla reflected on the nature of transformation, how it rarely occurred through dramatic moments of magical intervention, but through sustained effort guided by genuine values. What had changed their lives wasn't the coin itself, but what it had revealed about character, about priorities, about human connection that transcended social division. The opportunity Ricardo had provided had mattered enormously, but so had Camilla's determination to seize that opportunity, to prove her capacity through consistent performance rather than relying on the initial gesture of recognition. Their partnership, professional, personal, parental, had evolved through conscious choice and deliberate action, rather than romantic fantasy or convenient circumstance. The family they had created defied conventional definition precisely because it had been built on values more fundamental than traditional structures: respect, communication, genuine care, recognition of each person's inherent worth. As evening approached and guests began to depart, the immediate family gathered in the garden that had witnessed so many significant moments in their shared journey. Louisa, still in her graduation gown but with the cap now discarded, accepted congratulations from each family member in turn. Sophia's enthusiastic hug, João's proud handshake, Miguel's playful teasing that barely masked his admiration for his sister's achievement. When she reached Ricardo, he embraced her with the genuine pride of a father, regardless of biological connection. "I couldn't be prouder if I'd been there from your first day of school," he told her, the emotion in his voice touching everyone who heard it. "But you were there for the most important parts," Louisa replied with the wisdom that had always characterized her. "The parts where it really mattered." The simple exchange captured the essence of their family, connections formed through choice, and commitment rather than merely circumstance or convention. Ricardo had indeed missed Louisa's early years, but the relationship they had built since then contained its own authentic value, its own meaningful milestones. As twilight deepened into evening, lanterns illuminated the garden, creating pools of warm light that emphasized the beauty Isabella had designed, and that they all now tended together. The family settled into comfortable conversation, sharing memories and plans, celebrating not just Louisa's graduation, but the journey they had traveled together. At one point, Miguel disappeared into the house, returning with something held carefully in his hands, the wooden box that contained the coin from that first fateful meeting. Over the years, it had become a family talisman of sorts, occasionally brought out during significant moments as a reminder of their unusual beginning. "I think we should add today to its story," Miguel suggested, displaying a sensitivity that sometimes surprised those who knew only his energetic exterior. "Another chapter in what started with this." Ricardo nodded approvingly at his stepson's insight. "You're right. Every significant moment in our family connects back to this beginning in ways we couldn't have anticipated." The box was opened, the ordinary coin gleaming in the lantern light as it was passed from hand to hand, each family member holding it briefly while sharing a thought or memory. When it reached Camilla, she found herself reflecting not just on the past but on the future that continued to unfold before them. "When I gave this coin to a stranger that night," she said quietly, "I had no idea what would grow from that simple act. I was just responding to human need with what little I had to offer. But look what it began, not just for us, but for everyone touched by the ripples of that moment." She glanced around at the faces that had become her family in the fullest sense of the word. Ricardo, whose recognition of her value had opened doors, but whose partnership had built something far more meaningful than mere opportunity. Louisa and Miguel, who had blossomed in the stable environment created through that partnership. Sophia, whose initial acceptance had grown into genuine sisterly affection for Camilla's children. Even João, whose journey of recovery had been supported rather than hindered by the family structure that had developed in his absence. "I think that's the real lesson," she continued thoughtfully. "That transformation rarely happens through dramatic interventions or magical solutions. It happens through human connection, through seeing value where others might miss it, through offering kindness without expectation of return, through building relationships based on genuine respect rather than superficial advantage." Ricardo's hand found hers, the gesture filled with understanding of exactly what she meant. And through the courage to step beyond conventional expectations to create something authentic, even when it doesn't fit predetermined patterns. The observation captured another essential aspect of their journey, the willingness to define family, partnership, and success on their own terms, rather than according to external standards or traditional models. What they had built together defied easy categorization precisely because it had grown organically from genuine connection, rather than conforming to established structures. As the conversation continued, touching on Luisa's plans for high school and beyond, Sophia's upcoming wedding preparations, Miguel's summer soccer camp ambitions, Camilla found herself filled with profound gratitude for the life they had created together. Not because it was perfect or without challenges, but because it was authentic, built through conscious choice, sustained through mutual respect, enriched through genuine care that transcended conventional boundaries. The coin that had started. Their journey remained an ordinary object, valuable not for what it was but for what it represented, the possibility that exists when human beings recognize each other's inherent worth beyond social division or superficial assessment. Its story had become family lore, shared not as a fairy tale of magical transformation, but as a human narrative of connection, opportunity, effort, and choice. As the evening drew to a close, family members departing with final congratulations to Luisa and promises of gatherings to come, Camila and Ricardo found themselves alone in the garden that had witnessed so much of their shared life. The lanterns still glowed softly, illuminating the space Isabella had designed years earlier, and that they had adapted to encompass their blended family's needs and preferences. "Happy?" Ricardo asked, echoing the question he had posed at various significant moments throughout their journey together. Camilla considered her response with the thoughtfulness that characterized their communication, not settling for superficial assurance, but genuinely reflecting on the complex reality of human experience. "Yes," she said finally, the simple word, encompassing a depth of meaning beyond casual affirmation. Not because everything is perfect or because all challenges are resolved, but because we've built something real together, something that honors who we are individually while creating something greater than we could have achieved alone. Ricardo nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their happiness wasn't based on fairy tale romance or freedom from difficulty, but on partnership that had been tested and proven through both celebration and challenge, a connection founded on mutual respect, sustained through honest communication, and enriched by shared purpose that transcended individual concerns. "I wonder sometimes," he mused, "how many potential connections like ours never develop, because people remain trapped in assumptions about where value exists or what forms relationship should take." The observation touched on something fundamental about their story, how easily it might never have occurred had either of them remained confined by conventional expectations or social divisions. If Ricardo had seen only a cleaning woman, rather than a person of intelligence and character, if Camilla had viewed him only as a wealthy employer rather than a human being with his own struggles and strengths, if either had insisted that family must follow traditional structures rather than adapting to the authentic connections that had formed between them. "That's why sharing our story matters," Camilla replied. "Not because it's dramatic or unusual, but because it demonstrates possibility, the potential that exists when people see beyond surface assumptions to recognize genuine value in unexpected places." As they walked together through the garden that had witnessed their vows, celebrated family milestones, and provided space for both joyful gatherings and quiet reflection, Camilla felt the full weight of their journey, from that first encounter, on a cold night, to the rich, complex life they had built together. What had begun with a single coin offered freely to a stranger had evolved into something neither could have anticipated, but both now treasured beyond measure, a partnership based on genuine respect rather than predetermined roles, a family, created through choice rather than convention, a life defined not by external standards, but by authentic connection and shared purpose. The professional success they had achieved together at Alves Incorporated mattered, certainly. The material security it provided had transformed circumstances not just for them, but for the children who would now have opportunities Camilla had once thought beyond reach. Yet what gave their story its deepest meaning wasn't wealth or status, but human connection that transcended social division. Recognition of value that existed beyond conventional markers, relationships built on character rather than circumstance. As they reached the house that had become truly theirs through years of shared life, lights glowing welcomingly through windows that had witnessed countless family moments both ordinary and significant, Camilla paused to look back at the garden, now silvered with moonlight. The beauty Isabella had planted years earlier continued to flourish under their care. Adapted to include children's play spaces and gathering areas while preserving its essential character, a physical manifestation of how the past could be honored while creating something new that served present needs. "What are you thinking?" Ricardo asked, noting her contemplative expression. "That some might call what happened to us fate or destiny or luck," Camilla replied thoughtfully, "but I prefer to see it as possibility, the potential that exists when people move beyond assumptions to genuine connection, when kindness is offered without expectation of return, when value is recognized regardless of conventional markers of status or success." Ricardo nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their story wasn't about magical intervention or dramatic rescue, but about human recognition at its most genuine, seeing beyond surface appearances to the capacity that existed within each person, creating opportunity based on that recognition, building connection through mutual respect rather than predetermined patterns. "Possibility," he echoed, the word carrying all the meaning their journey had revealed. "I like that. It acknowledges both the unlikelihood of our particular path and the potential for similar connections if people are willing to see beyond established boundaries." As they entered their home together, moving through rooms filled with evidence of their shared life, family photographs documenting milestones and ordinary moments, books that reflected diverse interests, spaces adapted to accommodate both professional work and family gathering, Camilla felt a deep sense of rightness that transcended conventional happiness. What they had built together wasn't perfect or without challenge. There would be new adjustments ahead as the children grew toward adulthood, as professional responsibilities evolved, as aging parents required care, as life continued its inevitable cycle of change and adaptation. Yet the foundation remained solid, a partnership based on genuine respect, a family created through conscious choice, a connection that had been tested and proven through difficulties overcome together. From a single coin given freely on a cold night had grown something neither could have anticipated, but both now treasured beyond measure, not just personal happiness, but proof of possibility, demonstration that human connection could transcend social division when people recognized each other's inherent worth beyond superficial assessment or conventional expectation. It wasn't the story of a magical coin or fairy tale transformation, but of human recognition at its most authentic, seeing value where others might miss it, creating opportunity based on that recognition, building connection through mutual respect rather than predetermined patterns. A story not of dramatic rescue but of possibility, revealed through simple kindness, offered without expectation of return. As they moved through their home, checking on Miguel already asleep after the excitement of the day, looking in on Luisa, still awake and reading by lamplight surrounded by graduation gifts and cards, Camilla reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point of fulfilled possibility. From cleaner to executive, from employer to partner, from strangers divided by circumstance to family united by choice, each step had unfolded naturally from genuine values rather than external expectation. The coin that had started their journey remained an ordinary object, valuable not for what it was but for what it represented, the potential that exists when human beings recognize each other's worth beyond social division or superficial assessment. What they had created together, partnership based on mutual respect, family defined by choice rather than convention, success measured by authentic connection rather than merely material acquisition, stood as testament to possibility. Proof that transformation could grow from simple human recognition when accompanied by opportunity, effort and commitment to shared values beyond predetermined patterns. Not every coin offered to a stranger would lead to such profound connection. Not every act of kindness would transform lives so dramatically. But their story demonstrated the potential that existed when people moved beyond assumptions to see the humanity in each other, the possibility for authentic connection across social division, for recognition of value in unexpected places, for building relationship based on character rather than circumstance or convention. As Camilla prepared for sleep that night, the house quiet after a day of celebration, she found herself reflecting once more on the journey that had brought them to this point of fulfilled possibility. From that first encounter on a cold night, to the rich, complex life they had built together, a testament not to magical intervention, but to human connection at its most genuine and transformative. The last coin, given freely when it was all she had indeed changed everything. Not through enchantment, but through the very human miracle of recognition, opportunity, effort, and choice, guided by values more fundamental than social division or conventional expectation. As she drifted toward sleep beside the man who had once been a stranger and was now the center of the family they had created together, Camilla carried with her a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the life they shared, but for the proof it offered. That possibility existed beyond established boundaries. That authentic connection could transform lives when people recognized each other's inherent worth, regardless of where society placed them. From the most unlikely beginning, had grown something precious beyond measure, not just personal happiness but demonstration that human potential existed in unexpected places, waiting only for recognition and opportunity to flourish into something that could change not just individual lives, but ripple outward to transform systems, perspectives, and possibilities for others yet to come. The coin was just an ordinary object. Its power lay not in what it was, but in what it revealed about the people whose lives had connected through that simple exchange. A willingness to see beyond surface appearances to human need and human capacity. Courage to step beyond conventional boundaries to create authentic connection. Commitment to building relationship based on genuine respect rather than predetermined patterns. These were the true treasures their journey had revealed, values that had transformed not just their individual circumstances, but their understanding of what was possible when people recognized each other's worth beyond social division or superficial assessment. As sleep finally claimed her, Camilla carried this knowledge like a bright thread woven through dreams of past and future, the certainty that from the simplest human connection could grow possibility beyond imagination when guided by genuine recognition of the value that exists in each person, waiting only to be seen, acknowledged, and given space to flourish into its full potential. If you enjoy our content, please help our team reach 1,000 subscribers.